Chapter 96. At this moment, in the village, Butler Jean covered his face with a towel and shouted angrily, "I don't care. Don't forget that you are just a dog of the Jean family. The first master is the future head of the Jean family and even the general of the Dahan country. How dare you disobey his orders?" As soon as he said that, the three leaders of the tiger village looked gloomy. Although what Butler Jean said was true, his words were too explicit and ugly. He didn't give them any face. At this time, the burly first leader stood up and said in a low voice, "Butler Jean, since you said so, we have no reason to refuse. We, the Raging Tiger Troop, have no reason to refuse, but you have to give us time to prepare. Otherwise, we will be surrounded by the government, and your Jean family will be in trouble." Butler Jean snorted and suppressed his anger. He shouted coldly, "Tomorrow at the latest. Tomorrow, I will see you catch all the people of the Leanly building and let the child punish them. Especially their boss, Mr. Lee. Even if you can't catch others, you must catch this person." Then Butler Jean took out the portrait from his arms. The first leader took it and looked at it. He was so angry that he laughed and said, "Butler, you are making things difficult for us. A person with a bamboo hat is everywhere on the street. Where can we find him? Even if we really bring him back, you won't recognize him." Butler Jean wanted to continue to say something. Suddenly, he stared at the back of the first leader. The two leaders subconsciously looked back and saw a sword and a saber quickly enlarged in front of them. Puff! The sword almost pierced their hearts at the same time. Ho ho! Warm blood spurted out. The two people made an inexplicable sound. Soon, they fell to the ground, twitched, and died. Seeing this scene, Butler Jean's blood was almost frozen. He was so scared that he couldn't move. He was afraid that if he moved, he would be the same as the two leaders of the tiger village. When the first leader heard the sound, his pupils shrank. He rushed out of the window like lightning. He thought that it was not a problem for him to escape with his cultivation and body movement. But soon, he found that his body strangely stopped. No matter how he ran forward. Then, what made him even more scared was that his body began to involuntarily step back. It was as if time went back and he returned to the original place. Ghost! Butler Jean was so scared that he fainted. The great leader was left alone, immersed in fear and unable to move. Telekinesis. It was telekinesis. Motherfucker, when did I offend a legendary figure? At this moment, the faint sound of wind blew over, and the great leader immediately smelled an extremely thick stench of blood. Apart from the living people in the houses, the entire Raging Tiger Bastion was dead silent, not a single sound could be heard. Hoo-hoo, the great leader couldn't help but gasp in fear. Slowly turning around, he saw the bamboo hat man. His eyes widened as he looked at the portrait in his hand. He immediately understood what had happened. "Butler Jean, you're courting death. How dare you bring the Raging Tiger Troop with you?" Tick-tock, tick-tock. Blood flowed down the tip of the sword and knife, dripping onto the dust with a dull sound. Chu Qingning and Fong Yuan stared at Su Li in a daze. Their faces were dull, but their hearts were in turmoil. Even though they had overestimated Su Li's cultivation and even thought that she was a senior at the peak of the acquired realm, they didn't expect that she was also a young master of the inborn realm. Another young master of the inborn realm. When did the young master of the inborn realm become so worthless? Chu Qingning curled his lips and looked at Fong Yuan, who was in a daze. He inexplicably felt distressed for him. Fong Yuan thought that others couldn't see it, but he was experienced after all. How could he not understand Fong Yuan's thoughts? Unfortunately, Fong Yuan was excellent, but it seemed that he was still far from being worthy of Su Li. Fong Yuan's eyes were firm. He tightly grasped the hilt of the sword, and the blood on his hands fell faster. He would not admit defeat. I admit defeat, and you can punish me as you wish. The great leader was very relaxed. Since Suli was not in a hurry to kill him, it was obvious that she had something to ask, and he had a chance to live. Suli chuckled and said, "If you hadn't promised Butler Jean before, I might have felt guilty in my heart." The implication was that even if he didn't promise, this horrible woman would kill all the people in the raging tiger village. The great leader's lips trembled slightly. Compared with the real evil figures, what he had done before seemed to be child's play and was not worth mentioning at all. Those who kill will be killed by others. The people I killed in this life deserve it, and I won't have any guilt in my heart. Suli suddenly muttered to herself, and then she sighed charmingly, "Wu Lin, you have committed countless sins in your life. You deserve to die, but I will let you choose a more dignified way to die. What do you think? How do you know my name?" The great leader's face was completely pale, as if the name was a taboo for him. "I not only know it, but also know that you have a wife, a son, and an old mother. In your family, you are a businessman who doesn't know how to do business. You are not a bandit who commits all kinds of crimes, such as burning, killing, and looting." Suli's words were light, but it made the 8-foot-tall man tremble all over. He knelt down and cried, "Senior, I will do as you say. Please don't tell the truth to my family." Seeing Wu Lin kneeling at the feet of Suli, Chu Qingning and Fang Yuan were completely silent, and it was difficult for them to calm down. It seemed that they knew Suli for the first time today. The girl who seemed to be only 16 years old seemed to be more complicated than they thought. Late at night, the cold wind blew. The three people walked on the mountain road, and they were all protected by the genuine energy, so they were not cold. Facing the cold moonlight, Suli held a small box in her hand and suddenly smiled. "What? Do you think I am despicable and cruel?" Chu Qingning immediately shook his head, and then he was silent for a moment, and said, "The weak are pitiful and hateful. Wu Lin is not weak, so there is only hatred left. But if he dies, his family. I will take care of him secretly." Fang Yuan said, "And obviously, he couldn't bear to die." "Very good." Suli smiled with melancholy. "You still have compassion as a human, but I accidentally lost it a long time ago." In the night, there was a sweet chuckle, but it was sad in people's ears. The next day, the Qinghe provincial office really received Wu Lin's surrender, and an account was presented, which recorded the absurd things that the Jin family asked him to do secretly in these years. Satrap Yen was furious, but he didn't take any action. Obviously, the troops under his command were mobilized frequently. Suli knew that it was impossible to bring down the Jin family only by this point. Wu Lin would finally die in prison, and the ending had been written. Because he took the poison prepared by herself. Jin Cheng A.O., in the previous life, you took people to beat him to death on the street, and ruined my family. In this life, I'll let you have a taste of how painful that feeling is. Suli stood on the top floor and looked at the south of the city. There seemed to be 2 clusters of small flames burning in her dark pupils. The matter of the tiger village was exposed, and the Jin family was badly battered. They had no time to pay attention to the Linli building. Suli was free, but not free. There were too many things to prepare. Butler Jean returned to the Jean family in a daze, and he couldn't remember what happened last night. Didn't he go to the tiger village to give the order of the master? Why did he come back in a daze? Unconsciously, Butler Jean came to the study of Jin Cheng A.O. Jin Cheng A.O. looked gloomy. When he saw Butler Jean coming, he slapped him without saying a word. Slap. Butler Jean couldn't stand the slap. He was thrown to the wall directly. He saw stars and spat out several teeth. Idiot! What did you do yesterday? Jean Cheng Ao was full of anger. Because of the matter of the tiger village, he was scolded by his father. Even the official's visit was blamed on him. He never allowed any stain on himself. When did he suffer such grievances? And all of this was brought by Butler Jean. Butler Jean was stunned. When he heard the angry words of the master, he immediately got up and knelt down. He repeatedly begged for mercy. "Master, please understand. Yesterday, I went to the tiger village according to your order." He didn't dare to say that he seemed to remember nothing. He could only find something to say according to the original memory. Unexpectedly, when he just opened his mouth, he was slapped again. "How dare you say that? Do you really think that I don't dare to change the butler? Ah! Don't hit me. I know I'm wrong. Ah. Master, someone will die if you hit me again." Butler Jean was almost beaten to death, but he couldn't say anything about what happened last night. Jean Cheng Ao suddenly felt that he must have something to hide. One of Butler Jin's legs was broken. His ending was miserable. Jean Cheng Ao asked someone to carry Butler Jean who couldn't speak. He restrained his anger and sneered, "No matter who did it, it's ridiculous to rely on the tiger village to bring down the Jean family." The so-called account and confession were all Wu Lin's words. As long as the Jean family didn't admit it, they would be safe. But on the third day, the Jean family suddenly learned from the informant of the official that Wu Lin suddenly died in prison. Before he died, he wrote the name Jean Cheng Ao. It made Jean Cheng Ao feel cold. He finally realized that the opponent's means were not as simple as he thought. In the satrap's mansion, Yen Zai said angrily, "Father, the Jean family is too much. They don't respect the satrap's mansion at all. They even dare to kill people in prison. They are lawless." In front of him stood an elegant middle-aged man in an official uniform. From the surface, no one could see that he was Yen Shishun, the satrap who was in charge of the military power in the Qinghe town. Instead, he was more like a Confucian scholar who was well-read. At this moment, the Confucian scholar's face was very cold. Obviously, he was extremely angry. The Jean family killed people in the government, which really challenged his bottom line. If he didn't do something, people would really think that he was just a decoration. But in his opinion, this matter was strange everywhere. He couldn't say it out. It was all based on his intuition. Although the Jean family was arrogant, they were arrogant secretly. He couldn't get anything on them. But this time, it was too obvious. Thinking of this, he raised his hand and asked, "Zai, you took people to investigate the tiger village. What's the result?" Yen Zai's expression didn't change. He nodded resolutely and said, "As Wu Lin said, the tiger village was destroyed by the enemy. No one survived. It seems that Wu Lin surrendered himself to the government in order to save his life. But he failed to escape from the evil hands of the Jean family. It's really sad." Yen Shishun snorted coldly and said, "Wu Lin is guilty and deserves to die. Even if his stronghold was exterminated, there's nothing to be pitted about. Those people all killed people. Zai, it's not the right place for you to be compassionate. You still need to gain more experience." "Yes, father." Yen Zai responded obediently. He retreated and went back to his house. But he found that his back was wet. In addition to the Linli building, only he knew that the tiger village was controlled by Ms. Li. His father also used to be a person in the martial arts circle. Sure enough, people in the martial arts circle were all so cold-hearted and ruthless. For a moment, Yen Zai was confused. He didn't know whether he was working hard in the right direction. Rumors gradually spread in the city. It turned out that the Jean family secretly supported the bandits. In these years, they burned, killed and looted. No one knew how much dirty money they had seized. But they pretended to be sanctimonious all day long. Among the ordinary people, there was public indignation. But they didn't dare to say anything. It was Suli who arranged people to spread such remarks. Chu Qingning had been paying attention to the progress of things. When the discussion calmed down, he immediately came to Suli to ask for the next step. The next step? Suli put on her cloak and shrugged as if nothing had happened. She said, "I'm going to class. I have classes tomorrow." Chu Qingning was stunned and instantly speechless. Suli's words seemed that she and Fang Yuan were the ones who caused all the troubles in the Qinghe town. Chapter 97. The cold wind was whistling outside, and the stove was lit in the warm room. It was as warm as spring. Yan Hongxiu pushed the door open and rushed in with her maid Huan. Her body, which was slightly curled up in the cold, suddenly stretched out. She glanced at Suli, who was already sitting at the desk. She snorted and sat in her seat. Other seats were empty. Yan Hongxiu was the first to arrive. After a while, the other 4 people also came to the warm room. Jean Rulan was still the last one, but she arrived on time. As soon as Jean Rulan appeared, others immediately looked at her. Yan Hongxiu's eyes were cold. There were too many rumors about the Jean family these days. She didn't expect that Jean Rulan dared to come to class at such a sensitive time. Jean Rulan felt bitter in her heart. She didn't want to come at all. But thinking of Suli's means last time, how dare she not come? Even if her family ordered her not to go out at will, she still sneaked out from the back door to attend class. Since everyone is here, let's start the class. Suli, who was sitting at the desk and taking a nap, opened her eyes and said lightly, "Today we..." Suli was very familiar with the details of Han embroidery. Gong Min and others were fascinated by it. But Yan Hongxiu, who had never been interested in embroidery, began to be absent-minded. Suli probably doesn't know how chaotic the outside world is. Suli is born in an ordinary family, but she lives in the school with a skill. She is also happy. Yan Hongxiu thought with a trace of helplessness, since the old guy of the Jean family became a supervisor, the situation of the family is getting worse year by year. If only I could share the burden for my father. The 3rd brother said that the archery master he found for me is coming. I have never seen such an arrogant master. I haven't seen him for several days. Tonight, I want to see whether the master has 3 heads and 6 arms or is an almighty immortal. Even the 3rd brother admires him so much. Suddenly, Suli's harsh voice sounded in her ears. "Yan Hongxiu, what did I just say? Repeat it." Yan Hongxiu was scared and finally came to herself. Seeing Suli, Gong Min and others looking at her expressionlessly, she blushed. Stand aside and listen to the class. If you dare to be absent-minded next time, go out." Suli's tone was light. Yan Hongxiu looked at the ice and snow outside and couldn't help but shiver slightly. She didn't dare to be distracted anymore. After class, Suli assigned the embroidery homework and turned to leave. Seeing that Suli walked out of the door, Yan Hongxiu finally couldn't help but sit down directly. She rubbed her sore legs and tears welled up in her eyes. She said, "Suli. Suli. How dare you treat me like this? Miss, are you all right?" Huan ran over to help Yan Hongxiu up. She couldn't help but wave her fist and said angrily, "Suli is too much. Miss, why don't we find someone to beat them up?" Yan Hongxiu burst into laughter. She couldn't help but touch Huan Er's nose. "This can't work. I will be a female general in the future. A general should be fair. This time I was absent-minded in class, so I should be punished a little." How can I trouble Suli? Huan looked at Yan Hongxiu in horror, as if she didn't know the person in front of her. If it was in the past, the young lady would definitely not have said that. How could the young lady's temper become so good after a few days of class? After class, Suli stayed in the school for half a day. She didn't return to the courtyard until the evening. After dinner, she changed into the identity of Mr. Li, and walked slowly to the martial arts field of the girls' school. At this moment, Yan Hongxiu wore a thin martial arts suit and stood shivering in the cold wind. She looked at Yan Zai with hidden bitterness. She was so cold that she couldn't speak clearly. Third brother. Will the master you speak of really come? It's almost midnight. Do you want to freeze Shou to death? Yan Zai's face was also pale with cold. He didn't dare to say that he and Mr. Li had an appointment at midnight. Because he couldn't restrain his respect for the inborn senior, he came a little earlier. Suddenly, Yan Hongxiu saw a figure flash behind Yan Zai, and there was a man in white. She was so scared that she almost screamed. Fortunately, Yan Zai covered her mouth in time, so she didn't disturb the people of the school. Third child, is this your sister, Yan Hongxiu? She really is a beauty in the making. Mr. Li's voice sounded in Yan Zai's ears. It was still so strange that people couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman. Yan Zai had heard this voice for a long time, but he felt that the voice was inexplicably pleasant. Maybe the extraordinariness of the inborn senior had been deified in his heart. Yan Hongxiu looked strange. She finally confirmed that the man in the bamboo hat, who was neither a man nor a woman, was the archery master that the third brother found for her. She couldn't help but point at Suli and said angrily, "Third brother, who is he? He is so sneaky. I can tell that he is not a good person. What kind of master did you find for me?" Yan Zai was so scared that he broke into a cold sweat. He couldn't help but scold, "Shut up. Be respectful to the master." Yan Hongxiu had never seen such a fierce third brother. Her eyes suddenly turned red and she said, "Third brother, why are you so fierce to me?" After the stress, Yan Zai realized what he had done. He scolded himself for being stupid in his heart, but he didn't know how to comfort and explain. At this time, Suli chuckled and said, "Forget it. Third child Yan, you are innocent because you didn't know. Your sister did it unintentionally. Don't be angry. It's me who was rude." Yan Zai was ashamed and thought that the temperament of the inborn senior was really beyond the reach of ordinary people. Yan Hongxiu was strong and didn't cry. She took the bow off her back and handed it to Suli with difficulty. She said, "Since you are the archery master that the third brother found, show me some real skills. Otherwise, no matter who you are not qualified for me to call you master." Fourth sister. Yan Zai's words turned into a sigh at last. Even if he said that Mr. Li was an inborn senior, the fourth sister wouldn't think that it was powerful. The womenfolk of the Yan family knew far less about the martial arts circle than the men. "Is this the bow that your father gave you?" Suli took it with one hand and looked at it carefully. There seemed to be a flash of light in her eyes. She sighed softly and said, "It is really a spiritual bow. He is even willing to give a spiritual bow to his daughter. It seems that satrap Yan dotes on Miss Hongxiu very much." Yan Hongxiu's face was slightly red. She turned her head and snorted. She thought that even if he praised her, she wouldn't be happy at all. Yan Zai sighed. His father was really forcing her. If Yan Hongxiu couldn't break through to the inborn realm, she couldn't draw the bow in her life, let alone 3 years. This year was the last year. After this year, the fourth sister could only stay at home and wait for her marriage. "I absolutely wouldn't allow my sister to become a victim of the family." Yan Zai's eyes flashed fiercely. He made a fist and palm salute to Su Li. He bowed deeply and said, "Mr. Li, my sister is yours. She only has 1 year. Although the request is too much, I still want to say that if my sister can't fulfill the agreement with my father, please help us." "Brother, what are you doing?" Yan Hongxiu saw that he was so humble. She was angry and said angrily, "Isn't it just a broken bow? Give me another year and I will definitely draw it." Yan Zai shook his head and still looked at Su Li without blinking. Su Li's bamboo hat moved a little. It seemed that she was considering the feasibility of the matter. After a while, she shook her head and said, "Third child Yan, you don't have to do this." Yan Zai's body collapsed and he couldn't help showing disappointment on his face. As expected, she didn't agree. Well, the martial arts circle and the imperial court had always complemented each other. His request was too much. Although the Linli building is not a big winery, we can still guarantee our credibility. Since we have made an agreement with you, we can certainly do it. If we can't do it, there is only one possibility. That is, the Linli building doesn't exist. Are you satisfied? Yan Zai was stunned on the spot. Did Ms. Li know what she was talking about? Why did it sound like an unrealistic lie to him? The Linli building. Yan Hongxiu heard the keyword and looked at Su Li eagerly. She said, "Are you the boss of the Linli building, Mr. Li?" Su Li nodded slightly and suddenly stretched out her hand to grasp the void behind her. Swish! In Yan Hongxiu's almost dull eyes, an arrow automatically flew out of the quiver and fell into her hand. She said, "Miss Hongxiu, time is running out. Tonight, I'll show you how to use this bow." Su Li took a slight breath and slowly pulled the silver longbow with the arrow in her hand. Buzz! The bow made a clear buzzing sound as if it was cheering. A bit of fluorescence gradually lit up from the tip of the arrow. It was as bright as a star and quickly enlarged in front of Yan Zai and his sister. At this moment, it was even brighter than the moonlight in the sky. Clang! The arrow was shot out like a meteor. There was no sound after it got out of the bow. When the light disappeared, Yan Hongxiu woke up. She couldn't help but run to the target. She saw a fist-sized hole in the center of the target. The arrow went deep into the ground, leaving a hole that couldn't be found anymore. What kind of archery is this? Yan Hongxiu stood in the cold wind in a daze. She couldn't help but pinch her arm. "It hurts." She hissed softly and looked up at Su Li, who stood beside Yan Zai and held the bow with one hand. Her clear eyes immediately lit up. The scorching heat instantly burned all the previous disdain and doubt, leaving only deep worship. Is she an immortal? My brother found an immortal master for me. Yan Hongxiu's eyes were hot and she immediately ran to Su Li. Su Li stood in the same place and felt strange. At the moment when she pulled the bow and shot the arrow, another group of unknown stars seemed to automatically escape and disappeared into the arrow. The force used was the same force. But the power of this arrow was much more powerful than that of the archery she practiced in the past 2 days. Yan Zai was shocked and his blood was boiling. This was the inborn realm. He was like an immortal on the earth. Even his father didn't dare to be disrespectful in front of Mr. Li. He only relied on his own strength to control his destiny. This was the life he wanted. Immortal Master, you are so awesome. At this time, Yan Hongxiu walked back from the target. She simply knelt down and obediently admitted her mistake. She said, "Immortal Master, forgive me for my disrespect just now. I will follow you to practice archery in the future and won't tarnish your reputation." Even if Yan Hongxiu didn't know much about the martial arts circle, her eyes wouldn't lie. The person who could shoot the light must be a senior who was more powerful than her father. She finally understood why the third brother was scared in front of Mr. Li. She finally knew the third brother's good intention. It was ridiculous that she contradicted such a person before. She could only hope that it was not too late to kneel down and admit her mistake. I have no intention to accept you as an apprentice. Chapter 98. It seemed that Su Li didn't see Yan Hongxiu's expression and continued to say, "The fate between you and me began with a deal between child Yan and me. We're not master and disciple." His words were cold and indifferent, which made Yan Hongxiu's heart cold. She looked a little better. It turned out that Mr. Li was not angry because of her behavior. But why did she feel more bitter in her heart? Maybe my performance just now was better. Will this person really accept me as a disciple? Yan Hongxiu still held an unrealistic dream. She played with Yan Zai since childhood and was greatly influenced by him. In addition to the dream of being a female general, she also dreamed of being a chivalrous heroine in the martial arts circle. In her mind, Mr. Li was obviously her ideal image. "Mr. Li," Yan Zai took a deep breath and barely regained his composure. "If my sister learns archery from you, can she really break through that realm within a year?" "Of course not." Su Li looked at Yan Zai and teased him, "If the inborn realm is really as easy as you said, wouldn't the martial arts circle be in a mess?" "Mr. Li, you mean?" Yan Zai was immediately anxious. Su Li waved her hand and said lightly, "I naturally have other ways to let your sister master this bow, although it is not as powerful as the inborn realm. But if she can use this bow to fight, at least your sister's archery skills will be better than County Chief Yan's. Young master, can you accept this result?" Before Yan Zai said it, Yan Hongxiu shouted in surprise, "I can accept it." Dad was the #1 expert in Qinghe town, although it was only on the surface. However, if she could surpass her father in archery, she would not need to be manipulated by her family. It would not be impossible for her to become a female general in the future. Our brother and sister can naturally accept Sir's words. Yan Zai's face was filled with joy. Then, he hesitated a little and said, "Then don't worry, young master. The Linli building will not let you down." Su Li made a promise and looked at Yan Hongxiu again. "This year, Miss Hongxiu will suffer a little." Yan Hongxiu was slightly flustered, but she finally gritted her teeth and said, "Mr. Li, don't worry. As long as I can achieve my goal, I can persist." Then the first step, Su Li put the silver bow in Yan Hongxiu's hand and said, "No matter when you eat, sleep or go anywhere in the future, you must be careful." They had to carry this bow with them and stroke it at least 1,000 times a day. "If you can do it, I'll tell you the next step in a month." "Can't leave my body." Yan Hongxiu stared blankly at the silver longbow in her hand, which was not much shorter than her height. Her face instantly darkened. Jin Family East Courtyard Study. Jin Cheng Ao lazily leaned against the back of the chair. He lowered his eyes and said in a very oppressive voice, "What did my father say?" The manservant who was bowing in front of Jin Cheng Ao was shocked and immediately replied, "Master said that you should stop for the time being. You can't deal with the Linli building before we find out the culprit." When Jin Cheng Ao heard the words, he immediately laughed in a low voice, "I'm old after all. I'm overcautious. My goal was not only the Dehan country. How could I waste time in the small Qinghe province? Since he doesn't allow me to touch the Linli building, what about the embroidery workshop?" The manservant bent his body and didn't dare to move. He knew that the master didn't ask him at all. If you can get the embroidery workshop, the Jin family will have a greater say. The head of the Jin family looked at his son with a complicated and ambitious look. He said, "But Gong Xiangjuan is extremely difficult to deal with. If you want the embroidery workshop, you can't avoid her. She and the housekeeper of the Yen family may not be able to enter the door if you visit them. Father, you must be joking. Jean Cheng Ao patted the folding fan in his hand and laughed wantonly. The workshop owner of the embroidery workshop is a little girl. The supervisor is not only effective to the satrap's mansion, but also to the embroidery workshop. The head of the Jean family's pupils shrank and his face immediately darkened. He said, "What do you want to do? We can't offend the Gong family." "Father, don't worry. I know what to do." Jean Cheng Ao's eyes were full of smiles. An inexplicable sense of danger slowly diffused from him. Even his father, the head of the Jean family, couldn't help but feel cold. Since his son came back that year, he seemed to be a different person. Although he was very pleased with his son's outstanding talent and ability, he could no longer feel the affection between father and son. On this day, Suli was bored inside. Suddenly, someone came to pass a message. Something happened to the embroidery workshop. Suli raised her eyebrows and glanced at Gao Dahai, who came to report with sweat all over his head. She said in a low voice, "Take me there." Looking at Suli's calm face, Gao Dahai also calmed down a lot. He hurriedly took Suli to drive the carriage to the embroidery workshop. At this time, to attack the embroidery workshop, sitting in the carriage, Suli pondered from time to time. There were not many families who dared to attack the embroidery workshop. Not to mention that Gong Xiangjuan was still alive. She could guess who dared to attack the embroidery workshop at this time without thinking. Has Jean Cheng Ao already got the practice method at this time? Suli gently rubbed her eyebrows and suddenly smiled meaningfully. She said, "It turns out that it is much simpler than I thought." Whoa! Gao Dahai stopped the carriage. Suli immediately walked out and rushed to the back hall of the embroidery workshop. At this moment, the atmosphere in the back hall of the embroidery workshop was extremely solemn. Jian, the chief steward, stood in the front. Behind him stood a group of angry embroidery artificers. Opposite them was a group of cold-looking rich businessmen. "Everyone, I have already said that this batch of embroidery is not from the embroidery workshop. The embroidery workshop in the Qinghe province is full of treasures. The embroidery you take out is full of mistakes. Even the basic stitches are wrong. How can it be produced by our embroidery workshop?" Jian explained with a calm face. The leading rich businessman on the opposite side sneered, "Old man, you really know how to flatter yourself. Since your embroidery workshop changed its owner, I found that these rubbish often mixed in the embroidery. It must be that your embroidery workshop embezzled the profits. You still don't admit it." Jia An's expression changed immediately. How could he not know what kind of person the new workshop owner was? Every time she came here, she never mentioned the business profits of the embroidery workshop. She even didn't take the salary in recent months. Would such a workshop owner think of ways to embezzle the profits of the embroidery workshop? Jian didn't need to think to know that someone wanted to attack Suli. Thinking of the young girl with superb craftsmanship, Jian became more determined. He would never allow the workshop owner Su to be slandered. "What's so noisy?" At this time, a clear voice came from outside the door. Suli rushed in with a bit of concern on her face. Gao Dahai, who was behind her, saw that there was no change in the scene. He immediately breathed a sigh of relief. "Workshop owner. Workshop owner, you finally come." A group of embroidery artificers with red eyes saw Suli. It seemed that they found their backbone and surrounded her. Since Suli took over the embroidery workshop, their lives were the same as before. But their embroidery skills had more or less improved under Suli's guidance. Therefore, although Suli was the youngest among them, it did not prevent them from being respectful to Suli. Seeing this scene, the rich businessman curled his lips. He didn't expect that this silly girl had such a high prestige in the embroidery workshop. What a pity, workshop owner, you come at the right time. Jian looked worried. He didn't think that Su Li's coming would be of any use. But he still explained the matter. Su Li nodded slightly. She walked to the pile of ragged cloth and squatted down to check it carefully. The rich businessman immediately smiled and said, "Workshop owner Su, even if you see it 10,000 times, you can't change the fact that these are from the embroidery workshop. You'd better admit it. Did you embezzle our hard-earned money?" "Yes, admit it quickly." "Bitch. I didn't expect that you are so young and greedy. I'm afraid that you are dizzy with glory. Do you think that the whole embroidery workshop belongs to you? Bastard, get out of the embroidery workshop quickly." The embroidery artificers behind the rich businessman immediately scolded Su Li. Jia An's face changed. Seeing that Su Li was still squatting down to check the ragged cloth, the embroidery artificers couldn't help but cry in a low voice. God, the workshop owner was only a 16-year-old girl. Why did she suffer so much abuse? Jean Rulin hid among the embroidery artificers. She was so happy that she almost laughed out loud. Su Li, I didn't expect that you would be a thorn in my brother's side. Now I want to see how you can keep your identity. It's a big crime to embezzle the profit of the embroidery workshop. After seeing the last batch of embroidery, Su Li slowly stood up and raised her head. Her expression didn't change at all. She said lightly, "Have you finished?" The whole back hall was suddenly quiet. Even the rich businessman's face changed. He was held by an invisible force and his breath was slightly short. Su Li smiled slightly and said, "Since you have finished, it's my turn." Then she picked up a piece of embroidery and asked, "Squire, do you remember the specific delivery time of this embroidery?" The rich businessman's expression didn't change. He snorted and said, "Who remembers that kind of trivial stuff? These substandard products are mixed with good ones. It's very difficult for me to pick them out one by one. What about the approximate time?" Su Li's smile seemed to be meaningful. "Is it within 1 month? That is to say, these are the orders delivered after I took office." Su Li's words obviously meant something. Many embroidery artificers thought of something and their eyes lit up. The rich businessman didn't notice this and immediately nodded and said, "Of course. When Ms. Gong was the workshop owner, such a thing never happened. How can I doubt the character of the old workshop owner?" Clap. Clap. Su Li immediately clapped her hands with a smile, which made the rich businessman and others dumbfounded. Then today's matter is a bit interesting. Qing Shang, explain to this squire. Su Li said a person's name. Suddenly, a young woman with a shrewd face walked out from the embroidery artificers behind her. This woman was a talent that Su Li found in nearly 1 month's observation. Qing Shang looked at Su Li with a little excitement and then hurriedly bent down to check the cloth. Seeing this, the rich businessmen were shocked. Could it be that there really was a flaw? One of them subconsciously looked at Jean Rulin. Jean Rulin immediately shook her head slightly, indicating that she didn't know. Su Li saw this scene but didn't point it out. "Workshop owner, I have checked it." Chapter 99. Hearing Qing Shang's words, the expressions of all the wealthy merchants changed drastically. Seeing this, Qing Shang sneered and continued, "The first possibility is that this batch of embroidery came from the list of goods from a month ago." However, the squire had already denied it, so there was only the second possibility. That is, this batch of embroidery came from the apprentices of the embroidery workshop. Our embroidery workshop has never allowed apprentices to make a single. This rule is set by the government. Even the workshop owner can't change it. Jian came forward with a smile on his face, but his eyes were so cold that it could almost kill people. He said, I would like to ask you all, where did you steal this batch of inferior goods? The embroidery of the apprentices of the embroidery workshop in Qinghe Prefecture is destroyed every day. Looks like this old man needs to do a thorough investigation. You, don't spout nonsense. The leading merchant stuttered for a long time and couldn't say a complete sentence. In the end, he could only say bitterly, you guys are good. Let's wait and see. Seeing this group of people leaving in a hurry like dogs that had lost their homes, the whole embroidery workshop burst into cheers. Yay! We won. Boss, you're amazing. You solved the problem as soon as you arrived. It's great that I can prove my innocence. There must be a spy in the embroidery workshop. Don't let me know who it is, or I'll skin him alive. Jian smiled and sent everyone back to work. He walked to Suli and said with shame, workshop owner, I'm a disgrace to you. It doesn't matter. After all, you are not familiar with embroidery. Suli waved her hand and said, it's not a good thing for apprentice embroidery to be leaked out. This matter should be carefully investigated and no one can be spared. Yes. Jian bowed slightly and was finally completely convinced by Suli. It turned out that the owner of the old workshop did not choose people to sit in this position at random. He had thought that Suli would be in a panic when she encountered such a thing, and he would be the one to save her. He didn't expect the truth to be completely different from what he had imagined. He was even comforted by this young lady. Thinking of this, Jian smiled bitterly. After Suli left the embroidery workshop, she didn't have time to go back to the school. Instead, she came to the Linli building immediately. Investigate Gong Shangjuan's condition immediately. Chu Qingning, prepare the medicinal materials on the list. I will refine the medicine overnight. Fang Yuan, go to the Jin family to see whether there are officers and soldiers of the supervisor. Don't be found. There are seniors in the Jin family. After a series of orders, all the senior members of the Linli building were gone. Suli stood on the top floor and looked at the south of the city. The light in her eyes flickered. No one knew what she was thinking. Suli, I bought all the things. Even if I couldn't buy them, I still stole them. See if I'm right. Chu Qingning hurriedly came in and put a large bag of things in front of Suli. Suli glanced at it and took it into the underground addendum. Li, Chu, Li Li. Su, Chu Li, and Chu. Li came. Su, it. Su, Li said. Li, Su, Su, of people. Yan Hongxiu murmured, but she still carried the bow on her back. Then, she picked up the ordinary long bow and practiced. Yan Shixuan looked at her in the dark, and he was more confused. His daughter's enthusiasm for practicing the bow suddenly increased these days. Besides, she carried the bow all day and behaved strangely. He was worried about her. He had been following her secretly, but he didn't see anything special. As for what Yan Hongxiu was thinking, he certainly couldn't know. Forget it. In the last year, let her do whatever she wants. She is influenced by Zai too much. Yan Shixuan's eyes dimmed when he thought of Yan Zai. He said, Zai, the martial arts circle is not as simple as you think. When you grow up, you will understand my good intentions. That circle is not suitable for ordinary people. Late at night, the stars were getting dimmer. Squeak, the wooden door of the underground addendum was opened, and there was a faint smell of medicine. Suli walked out of the door with a tired face. She spent a lot of energy practicing today. Are you all right? It was the first time for Fang Yuan to see Suli with such an expression. He subconsciously asked. Suli glanced at him, and then put a bottle of white powder in his palm. She said, "You should have inquired about the residence of Butler Jean. After dawn, if it is me, you." Fong Yuan's expression changed slightly. He held the bottle tightly and asked, "Is there any other way?" Su Li smiled and said, "What? Can you think of a better way?" Fong Yuan was silent immediately. After a while, he put away the bottle and said in a deep voice, "If what you said is not good, I will do it myself." Su Li didn't answer again. She turned around and put a letter in Chu Qingning's hand. She said, "You go to Yan Zai and give it to him alone. I believe he will know what to do after reading it. By the way, how about the news I asked Haydn to inquire about?" Chu Qingning felt strange and said, "Su Li, how did you guess that Gong Xiangjuan would be seriously ill? Was it you who poisoned her?" Su Li shook her head with a smile and said, "You are not as smart as Yin Xuedong. If not, how could that silly girl fall in love with you?" "You?" Chu Qingning stared at her and said with hatred, "If you don't want to tell me, I will ask Xuedong." Fong Yuan felt helpless and thought, "You still have the mood to joke at this time." After dawn, Su Li returned to the courtyard of the school. Mammy Li just woke up and saw Su Li sitting in the central room. She immediately asked, "Miss, don't you sleep for a while?" Su Li bowed her head and tidied up her clothes. She said calmly, "I don't want to be too embarrassed." "What?" Mammy Li looked confused. Suddenly, boom! The wooden door of the courtyard was suddenly blasted open by a huge force. It broke into two halves and fell to the ground. A group of officers and soldiers with knives rushed in aggressively. When they saw Su Li, they immediately surrounded her. Workshop owner Su, now the supervisory department suspects that you collude with embroidery merchants and embezzle profits from them. The supervisor ordered that from today on, you will be put into the prison of the supervisory department to await the trial. Mammy Li was shocked. When she was about to argue with Su Li, the officers and soldiers directly put a knife on her neck and she couldn't move. Su Li didn't seem to see the knives all around her. She said lightly, "What happened yesterday is slander. I am the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop. My status is equal to the supervisor and satrap. The supervisory department arrested me without evidence. Aren't you afraid that the satrap's mansion will file a lawsuit to Yunjing?" The leader's face changed slightly. He immediately sneered and said, "Workshop owner Su, you are exaggerating. The supervisory department just asks you to go back to cooperate with the investigation. If you are wronged, you can explain to the supervisor. Take her away." Then, two people wanted to press Su Li's hands. Su Li shook them off fiercely. She was angry and said, "How dare you? I can go by myself. I want to see how the supervisor will slander an innocent person." The leader sneered in his heart. He had never seen anyone who could come out safely after entering the prison of the supervisory department. But on the surface, he still stretched out his hand and said, "Workshop owner Su, please." A group of officers and soldiers of the supervisory department didn't make a detour. They just took Su Li away from the gate of the school. Just for a moment, the whole Qinghe town was in an uproar. What? Su Li was taken away by the supervisory department? When Ruomin pounded the table angrily and asked anxiously, "When did it happen?" "Damn it. Sister Gong just fell ill." The Jean family immediately took action. They are really well informed. "No, I have to go to the satrap's mansion. I can't let anything happen to Su Li." The spies of the Linli building got the news immediately. Fong Yuan and Chu Qingning couldn't help but tremble slightly. At the same time, they acted according to Su Li's order. Su Li was taken away by the Jean family. Yan Hongxiu was still eating breakfast. When she heard such a shocking news, she almost choked to death. "Miss, I just know it. Will Suli be all right?" Juan said worriedly. Although the little lecturer looked extremely strict, the temperament and embroidery skills of the miss had obviously improved. How could such a good lecturer do bad things? "I'm going to find my father." Putting down the half-eaten breakfast, Yan Hongxiu carried the bow and ran out. Although she said she hated Suli, she immediately panicked when she heard that Suli was taken away by such a vicious family. "Suli, you have to hold on." When Yan Hongxiu came to her father's yard, she didn't find Yan Shixuan. When she asked the housekeeper, she knew that her father had already taken people to denounce Yan Shixuan. On the other side, Yan Zai didn't feel anything when he heard the news. Although the embroidery workshop was in trouble for the Yan family, he couldn't help with his identity and ability. He could only not get involved and make trouble for his father. Whoosh! Suddenly, a dart penetrated into the study and nailed directly in front of Yan Zai. It was only an inch away from Yan Zai's hand. "Who is it?" Yan Zai was shocked. He immediately turned over and jumped out of the window. He looked around but didn't see anyone. He went back to the study and took down the dart. When he opened the note on the dart, his face immediately changed. "Ms. Li." After reading the small words on it, Yan Zai's breath immediately changed from helplessness to confidence. He immediately burned the note. He didn't expect that Ms. Li would also intervene in this matter. As long as he acted according to the plan, he would definitely be able to cause a blow to the Jean family and prevent the Jean family from continuing to seize the embroidery workshop. "Father, let me help you this time." Thinking of this, Yan Zai went out confidently. At this moment, in the supervisory department, Yan Shixuan looked at Jin Jintian, the master of the Jin family, who was dressed in the official uniform of the supervisor. "Jin Jintian, you have gone too far this time. You arrested the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop without any evidence. Do you really think that the Qinghe province belongs to your family?" The matter of the Tiger Village and Wu Lin had already made his patience reach the limit. The matter of the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop even touched his nerves. If Jin Jintian couldn't give an explanation, he would definitely take action directly without any scruples. Even if both sides were injured, he would not hesitate. Jin Jintian laughed and said, "Satrap Yan, don't worry. I just act according to the rules." Yesterday, a group of rich businessmen came to me to complain that he was embezzled a lot of silver by the embroidery workshop. He went to the embroidery workshop to reason but was driven out. Then he took out the inferior embroidery of the embroidery workshop. Since the authentication material evidence are both here, I naturally have to invite workshop owner Su back and investigate it carefully. Yan Shixuan frowned and said, "Jin Jintian, you should know the regulations of the supervisory department better than me. You can't make a confession under torture. You arrested her without investigation. Don't you care about the regulations of the Dehan country?" "Lord Yan, you are wrong. Workshop owner Su is also a person of high status and power. If I arrest her after the investigation, it will be easy for the information to be leaked and workshop owner Su can escape." Jin Jintian was full of smiles, like a smiling tiger. The rules are dead, but people are alive. Therefore, this lowly official could only come up with this plan and capture him first. However, Lord Yan can rest assured that the supervisory department will take good care of workshop owner Su during the investigation. I promise that she will not lose a hair. As long as Lord Yan can prove that workshop owner Su is innocent, I will let her go immediately. Yan Shixuan's face was faintly blue. After looking at Jin Jintian for a few seconds, he finally couldn't help but snort coldly and leave. Jin Jintian was very well prepared. It was meaningless for him to waste time here. Now he could only hope that the group of so-called rich businessmen had not gone far. Walking out of the door, Yen Shishuen looked at the clear sky outside the supervisory department and sighed deeply. Chapter 100. The sunlight mixed with flying dust sprinkled down from the stone fence window. The hay on the ground made a slight crackling sound and burst out a little moldy smell. Suli sat down against the wall. She neither shouted angrily nor cried in a low voice. She was unusually quiet, which surprised the two jailers who were in charge of her. Screams and screams came from time to time, but Suli didn't seem to hear them. She slowly stretched out her hand, and a little sunshine shone on her fingertips, exuding warmth. Compared with the deep underground death prison in the previous life, the treatment in this life was much better. A smile appeared on the corner of Suli's mouth. It was a smile, but it made the two jailers shudder. Why is she still smiling? Is she crazy because of stimulation? In the woodshed of the Jean family, which was specially used to punish servants who made mistakes, there was a faint smell of blood in the room. Butler Jean lay on the hay and looked at the roof blankly. His right leg was twisted into a very strange angle. The wound was simply bandaged, but it was obviously not effective. Yellow pus could be seen flowing out of the gap. Suddenly, the door of the woodshed was opened with a slight sound. Butler Jean didn't look at it and continued to stare at the roof. Fong Yuan looked at the food all over the ground. There was no sign that the food had been touched. He knew that Butler Jean had fasted for many days. He was silent for a moment. Then he picked up the bucket next to him and poured it directly on Butler Jean's face. The cold touch made the butler tremble. He immediately turned his head slowly. When he saw Fong Yuan's disguised face, he trembled even more. He struggled to step back and shouted weakly, "Come on! Come on! Come on! Come on! Master!" But his voice was even lower than that of a mosquito. "Now, you still think of your master. Don't forget who broke your leg." Fong Yuan stood still, and his cold words pierced Butler Jin's heart like a knife. He said, "If I didn't appear, you would have been thrown to the mass grave by the servants of the Jean family after you died in the woodshed a few days later." Butler Jean stared at Fong Yuan and his eyes suddenly turned red. He said in a hoarse voice like a beast, "So what? I have been disabled. Are you here to laugh at me for your master?" "Of course not." Fong Yuan took out a piece of wood and threw it in front of Butler Jean. He said, "As long as you can do one thing for my master will restore your limbs." Butler Jin's expression froze, then he laughed crazily. "Do you think I'm a 3-year-old kid? You want me to believe such nonsense?" Fong Yuan's eyes showed impatience, but his tone was still calm. He said, "I almost forget that you have taken the medicine of the master and have completely forgotten what happened in the tiger village. Butler Jean, I'm here to give you a chance to take revenge. Even without you, I can still complete the task for master. Don't miss this opportunity." Butler Jin's expression finally changed. He really couldn't remember what happened in the Raging Tiger village that day, but this person said it was because of his master's medicine. Was there really a medicine in this world that could make people lose their memory for a short time? He remembered that he had only done everything according to the young master's instructions. In the end, he had been severely punished by the young master and had one of his legs broken. Butler Jin's face became more and more ferocious, and the flame of hatred burned in his eyes. "Now that I'm like this, even taking 2 steps is difficult. What do you want from me?" Butler Jin stared at Fong Yuan and asked slowly. Fong Yuan squatted down and put a bag of medicine into Butler Jin's hand. He whispered, "Don't worry. It's not a poison that can kill people immediately. I believe that with your identity, it's very easy to make your young master drink this medicine by accident, isn't it?" Butler Jin's hand holding the medicine bag trembled slightly. A trace of fear flashed in his pupils, but it was soon replaced by madness. He said, "As long as I can see Jean Ching Ao's miserable end, I'm willing to do anything. Don't worry. With my master's intervention, this day will not be too far away. You can live to see it." Fong Yuan gently patted Butler Jin's shoulder and left the Jin family quietly, as if he had never been here. Butler Jin stared at the medicine bag in his hand. Then he gritted his teeth and stood up with the support of the wooden stick. Then he jumped out of the woodshed. In the study, Jin Cheng Ao was lowering his head to study the swordsmanship book. He smiled from time to time. Obviously, he was in a very good mood. Those rich businessmen had been secretly dealt with by him. Even if Yan Shishuan searched the whole Qinghe province, he couldn't find them. The young workshop owner would stay in the supervisory division for at least a year and a half. Just as a country couldn't live without a king, the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop couldn't be vacant for a long time. Without Gong Xiangjuan's obstruction, the Jin family could let Jin Rulan sit in the position of the workshop owner successfully. The situation was very good. Jin Cheng Ao was naturally in a good mood. "Young master," Butler Jin said, "that he has something important to see you." Suddenly, there was a report outside the door. Jin Cheng Ao raised his head slightly and frowned slightly. Didn't he break the old guy's leg? How dare he come here? He wanted to refuse directly, but he was a little curious. So, he nodded and said, "Let him in." After a while, Butler Jin, who had rearranged himself, appeared in the room with a cane. Although he was severely punished by the young master, he was still the butler of the Jin family temporarily. He could take a bath and change his clothes. "Young master, I got the result of the thing you asked me to inquire about before," Butler Jin said breathlessly. The sharp pain in his right leg made him feel as if he was pierced by a blade every time he took a step. Although he had taken a bath, his back was all wet. "What's the matter?" Jin Cheng Ao raised his eyebrows and couldn't help but recall. The old butler had always worked for him. There were too many things that the butler had told him. So, he couldn't remember for a while. "It's this." Butler Jin took out a small bottle from his arms. When he shook it, there was a sound of water. It was unknown what kind of liquid it was. He pulled out the stopper of the bottle, and a refreshing fragrance suddenly filled the whole study room. The treasure of heaven and earth. Mystic stone milk. Jin Cheng Ao's eyes were shining. He took the jade bottle from Butler Jin's hand in a flash. He couldn't help being ecstatic. Although the amount was not much, such a small bottle of mystic stone milk was enough for him to improve his cultivation. "Good. Very good. Old butler, you are very good." Jin Cheng Ao couldn't help but praise him. When he looked up, he found that Butler Jin fell on the ground and groaned. It turned out that his action had knocked Butler Jin down. However, he focused on the jade bottle. He didn't care about Butler Jin's life or death. However, it was also thanks to Butler Jin that he could get the mystic stone milk. Jin Cheng Ao hesitated for a moment and immediately shouted, "Come on. Take the old butler away to treat his injury. Don't delay." "Thank you, young master." Butler Jin's face was full of gratitude, but he was laughing crazily in his heart. "Jin Cheng Ao, I knew you were looking for this, but I didn't take it out. I didn't expect that it would be useful one day. It is filled with the medicine that that person gave me. Drink it as much as you want. Drink it until you die." Ha 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 ha. After Butler Jin was carried away, Jin Cheng Ao immediately took the jade bottle and was ready to take it. However, he suddenly felt that it was not appropriate. He asked the manservant who recently replaced Butler Jean to pour a little mystic stone milk for him to drink. Young master, this thing is really delicious. After drinking it, I feel warm in my stomach. It seems that my body has inexhaustible strength. The manservant was intoxicated with the drink. His eyes were shining. He stared at the bottle in Jean Ching Ao's hand and couldn't wait to take another sip. Jean Ching Ao saw that the manservant was fine, and he was quite distressed. He waved his hand angrily to dismiss the manservant. Tell my father that I'm going to practice in isolation for a day. No one can disturb me. One day later, Jean Ching Ao walked out of the adytum with a sullen face. He always felt that he could break through if he went one step further, but he couldn't calm down somehow. It seemed that someone was talking in his ear. The amount of mystic stone milk is still too small. Jean Ching Ao muttered. He walked out of the room and hurried to Butler Jin's residence. He was in the situation, but he didn't realize that he had lost his usual calmness. Young master. Butler Jean was lying on the bed. Suddenly, he saw Jean Ching Ao coming. He was so scared that his face turned pale. Was he discovered by the young master? Jean Ching Ao waved his hand impatiently. Where did you get the mystic stone milk? Is there anything else? Butler Jean was stunned. How could he know that it happened more than a year ago? It was an unexpected gain. How could there be any origin? At this time, he suddenly heard a voice in his ear. Tell him that it has something to do with the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop. Make up a suitable reason. Butler Jean trembled slightly. The voice was so abrupt that he was almost scared out of his wits. But he still recognized the owner of the voice. He immediately suppressed the panic in his heart and opened his mouth to say, Young master, I remember. I got this bottle of treasure from the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop a month ago. That is, Suli, who was caught by you. She was not a lecturer of the girls' school at that time, and her status was not so high. I easily got it after some intimidation. After that, Butler Jean looked at Jean Ching Ao nervously. Although he had tried his best to cover up the lie, he could still detect the flaws if he thought carefully. Suli. Jean Ching Ao frowned and immediately left without saying anything. He went to the supervisory division. Butler Jean was dumbfounded. When did the young master become so impatient? In his impression, the young master always made a plan before making a decision. He was never as impulsive as he was today. Is it? Butler Jean suddenly thought of something. He was horrified and didn't dare to say another word. The voice just now made him suspect that the young man who gave him the medicine package was still around him. If he did something that was exposed, he was likely to be killed. Miss Lee said that she would cure my legs. Butler Jean carefully shrank back to the bed. After experiencing all kinds of strange things, he actually had a little confidence in Miss Lee. If she could recover her limbs, why did he need to die? But he didn't know that Fong Yuan was not around at this moment. He followed Jean Ching Ao. You are so young. It's rare for you to reach the acquired 9th hurdle. It's a pity that you took Su Li's medicine and are impetuous. You can't find me. Fong Yuan was extremely calm. Jean Ching Ao attracted attention in front of him. He avoided all the eyes and ears and quietly entered the prison of the supervisory division. At this moment, in the satrap's mansion, Yen Zai got the news. He immediately ran to his father and said hurriedly, Father. Go to save workshop owner Su. I just got the news that Jean Ching Ao went to the prison of the supervisory division. I'm afraid that he will hurt workshop owner Su. If workshop owner Su is really beaten to death or disabled, it will be terrible. Jean Ching Ao. Yan Shishuan heard it and stood up immediately. He said, "Hurry up. Go and gather people. He has always been lawless. Even his father can't control him. We have to stop him quickly." Chapter 101. As soon as he stepped into the dungeon, the cold and damp atmosphere immediately made Jin Ching Ao frown. He had been here before, but today he felt that this place was really disgusting. "Master, workshop owner Su is locked up here." The jailer pointed to a single cell. Looking in the direction he was pointing, one could see a young girl huddled together in the corner. She was wearing a thin prison uniform, and her body was trembling slightly. One could not help but feel a sense of pity for her. Seeing this scene, Jin Ching Ao was not anxious. He waved his hand to dismiss the jailer. Then he opened the cell door and walked in. Hearing the footsteps, Su Li immediately raised her head when she heard the footsteps. She saw a young and indifferent face. Jin Ching Ao. Su Li didn't see him in her previous life, but the image in the biography was quite vivid. She recognized him at a glance. "Workshop owner Su, you are really embarrassed." Jin Ching Ao squatted down and stared at Su Li's dirty face with a pair of playful eyes. He said, "I didn't expect that workshop owner Su is only 16 years old. I didn't believe it at first. But after seeing you in person, I think you look much younger than 16 years old. What do you want to do?" Su Li's body trembled, and a trace of stubbornness and fear appeared in her eyes just right. Fong Yuan, who was in the dark, rolled his eyes. But when he thought of Su Li's next actions, he couldn't help but hesitate. "Workshop owner Su, don't worry. I won't do anything to you." A trace of lust flashed in Jin Ching Ao's eyes, "As long as you are obedient." Su Li was slightly stunned when she saw this scene. Then a hint of hidden killing intent flashed in her eyes. She didn't use aphrodisiac, but she didn't expect that Jin Ching Ao was so unbearable. His first thought when he saw her was, Fong Yuan, who was above their heads, heard this. His right hand which was holding the sword trembled slightly. His calm eyes immediately burned with anger. What did this bastard want to do? "Workshop owner Su, please have a look at this thing. Do you remember its origin?" Jin Cheng Ao restrained his thoughts and took out the jade bottle. But this didn't mean that he had given up his previous idea. When the embroidery workshop elected a new workshop owner, this girl would have no status to protect her. Just by looking at her, he knew that this girl was still a virgin. He had long been tired of his second sister and the maids of the Jin family. It was a good time for him to change his taste. Su Li raised her head and looked at the jade bottle with a little doubt in her eyes. But soon she figured it out and said, "This is mine. It was robbed before. How could it be in your hands?" Jin Cheng Ao was happy when he heard that. "Do you still have the things inside?" "Ha! If you can tell me the exact location, I will plead with my father to spare your life." Su Li's face immediately showed disbelief and fear. "Spare my life? I'm innocent. You don't have any evidence. You can't do anything to me." Jin Cheng Ao heard it and immediately laughed. "Workshop owner Su is really naive. Can't I make it without evidence? Do you think you'll be able to walk out of here in 1 or 2 days when the workshop owner is changed?" "What?" Su Li was dissatisfied and desperate. She couldn't help but step back a few steps. She grabbed her chest with her right hand and bowed her head sadly. It seemed that she was suffocated by Jin Ching Ao's words. At this moment, her ears slightly moved. "Do it." The decisive and cold voice instantly exploded in Fong Yuan's ears. Clang! Fong Yuan had no time to think and immediately stabbed Jin Ching Ao's back with his sword. There was a sharp whistling sound. Jin Chang-ao's pupils shrank and his whole body shook without thinking. A circle of sword light instantly appeared around him. Ding! When the long sword touched Jin Chang-ao's back, it actually made a sound of gold and iron colliding. There were a few sparks. Protective sword energy. Fang Yuan didn't have time to be shocked by Jin Chang-ao's strength. He immediately changed his body and stabbed Su Li with his sword. Jin Chang-ao wouldn't allow Fang Yuan to mess around. He saw the flaw and grabbed Fang Yuan's wrist. Then he shook. Let go. Under the great strength, Fang Yuan really couldn't hold the long sword. The weapon was taken away by Jin Chang-ao. Jin Chang-ao sneered and directly left. He disappeared at the corner of the tunnel in the blink of an eye. Stop! Jin Chang-ao was furious. When he was about to catch up, the long sword in his hand suddenly didn't listen to him. He subconsciously grasped the sword, but even his body was inexplicably sucked to Su Li. Puff. At this moment, blood burst out. Jin Chang-ao stared blankly at the long sword in his hand inserted in Su Li's chest. His face was full of blood. How could this happen? Why can't the sword listen to me? Su Li was nailed to the wall and spat out a big mouthful of blood. Her pneuma instantly weakened and instantly became inaudible. At this moment, Yan Shixuan, Jin Jintian and others came to the dungeon together. They were all shocked on the spot. Time seemed to be frozen. They actually saw Jin Chang-ao kill Su Li with a sword. Bastard! How dare you kill her? Yan Shixuan was completely angry. He shouted and rushed out instantly. He slapped Jin Chang-ao's back with a big palm. When Jin Chang-ao was distracted, Yan Shixuan knocked him out and was arrested by the officers and soldiers of the provincial office. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. Before Jin Jintian reacted, it was over. Seeing that his son was dragged by two elite soldiers, he was immediately furious and wanted to stop them. But he was scared by Yan Shixuan's fierce eyes. Yan Shixuan arranged people to save Su Li from the wall. While he operated his martial arts to suppress Su Li's injury, he ordered, "Hurry up. Zai, go and invite the best doctor in the city." After doing all this, Yan Shixuan had time to look at Jin Jintian, who was dull. He sneered and said, "Lord Jin, what your son committed is enough to be killed. You'd better think of the reason why your son killed workshop owner Su. Otherwise, even you can't escape the legal sanctions of the Dahan country." Seeing that Yan Shixuan took his son away, Jin Jintian was so angry that he gnashed his teeth, but he didn't dare to act rashly. "Investigate. Investigate for me. My son will never do such a stupid thing. We must get to the bottom of this matter and prove Chang-ao's innocence." The entire supervisory division was in chaos. Fang Yuan left the supervisory division in the chaos, but his heart was extremely complicated. Su Li, in order to deal with the Jin family, is it really worth it? When Yan Hongxiu saw Yan Shixuan holding Su Li, who was covered with blood, and ran into the mansion, Yan Hongxiu was so scared that she covered her mouth and couldn't think. "Father, third brother, what happened? What happened to Su Li? She lost a lot of blood." Yan Hongxiu ran with Yan Zai in a panic. Yan Zai didn't have time to talk. He carried the old doctor, who was panting beside him. He was afraid that the old doctor would faint before they got to the room. "Prepare the hot water quickly. Don't shake her body. Lay flat. Steady." After a moment of chaos, the doctor felt Su Li's pulse with a tired face. He nodded slightly in the eyes of Yan Shixuan and others. "Her life is saved." Phew! Everyone breathed a sigh of relief, and Yan Shixuan was also afraid. If Suli died tonight, the matter would be too serious. Not only the Jean family would be finished, but also the Yen family would be implicated. A workshop owner of a provincial embroidery workshop died with injustice. It was a major event that shook the country. However, workshop owner Sue is also lucky. The doctor stroked his beard and sighed. Maybe at the moment of danger, she subconsciously dodged an inch, so that the sword cut the heart meridian just right and didn't hurt the root. Otherwise, she would have died on the way. How could she lie here? Hearing this, everyone couldn't help but be slightly stunned. Dodged all the heart meridian just right. His luck was truly indescribable. Yan Hongxiu squatted beside the bed and looked at Suli, who was lying on the bed breathing smoothly. She couldn't help but show a reassuring smile. In her mind, although Suli was not as powerful as the immortal master, she admired Suli for her immersion in teaching and insolence when teaching her. This was the feeling between people of the same age. In other words, she had regarded Suli as her idol. Although she still liked to oppose Suli on the surface, she had been sincerely convinced by Suli in her heart. If Suli was suddenly killed by the people of the Jean family, she would really be sad for a lifetime. Fortunately, Suli, you are lucky. You should get better soon and continue to teach me embroidery. The doctor and others left quietly. Yan Shixuan and Yan Zai had more things to do. Only Yan Hongxiu and Huan stayed in the room to accompany Suli quietly. How is Suli? As soon as Fang Yuan came back, he was surrounded by Chu Qingning and others. This dangerous move was truly frightening. If there was even the slightest mistake, they would lose their lives. Fang Yuan looked at the pairs of eyes staring at him and didn't want to tease them. He nodded and said, I went to the Yen mansion. Suli is fine. That sword was controlled by herself, so she would naturally avoid the vital parts. Besides, with her cultivation, even if her heart meridian was pierced. Then Fang Yuan looked at Chu Qingning. Chu Qingning couldn't help but scratch his head and said with a hollow smile, the inborn realm can control every inch of the body. Even if the heart meridian was pierced, Suli could close it in a short time. Her life would not be in danger. Haydn and others said, oh, and were greatly relieved. But Yin Xuedong and Fang Mu were shocked. Haydn and others didn't understand what the inborn realm was, but it didn't mean that they didn't understand. Suli, is she in the inborn realm? Yin Xuedong couldn't help but pinch Chu Qingning. Chu Qingning screamed in pain and said, why did you pinch me? I just know it. If you don't believe it, you can ask Fang Yuan. Fang Mu couldn't help but say, but it is too incredible. Miss Suli is 1 year younger than the eldest brother. She is in the inborn realm at the age of 16. She is a young master. It is said that, hush. Fang Yuan interrupted. Fang Mu came to his sense and almost said the taboo that couldn't be said. He was covered with a layer of cold sweat. What is the legend? Haydn and others couldn't help but surround them and said, bosses, why don't you continue? I heard that Boss Ling is also a young master. What is the relationship between this young master and the legend? Yes, bosses. You will be suffocated if you don't finish your words. Others couldn't help but jeer, but Fang Yuan and others kept it a secret and changed the topic. 3 days later, Suli woke up. Looking at Yan Hongxiu, who was surprised by the bed, she couldn't help but smile on her pale face. In fact, she didn't faint at all. She had been meditating and healing herself in the past 3 days. If such a little pain could make her faint, she couldn't have held on for so many years before she was caught in the previous life. Suli, you finally wake up. Yan Hongxiu said cheerfully, I will go to find my father. Suli realized that she was in the satrap's mansion. It was a place that she never dared to set foot in the previous life. After a while, Yan Shishuan finally arrived. He caught Enchanting, which meant that he fell out with the Jin family. He was very busy in the past 3 days. The Jin family held many industries in the Qinghe town and it was extremely difficult to deal with them. But he naturally wouldn't tell Su Li these. Workshop owner Su, I am relieved that you wake up. How do you feel? Chapter 102. Hearing that, Yan Shishuan was full of guilt and said, Workshop owner Su, you are exaggerating. In fact, it's all my fault. If I didn't let the Jin family mess around, there would be no such thing today. Fortunately, I saw the scene that Enchanting attacked you with my own eyes. No matter how many reasons Enchanting finds, his son can't get away with it. This time, I must act impartially and give justice to workshop owner. Su Li showed a gratified smile and nodded gently. I didn't expect that child Jin would suddenly kill me. This time, I almost passed by the gate of hell. It really makes Su Li feel scared. Since I'm fine, I won't bother you anymore. Satrap, please send me back to the school. Mammy is still waiting for me. Okay. Yan Shishuan promised, you have a personal mammy to take care of you. You will definitely recover faster than in my house. I'll send someone to send you back. After some arrangements, Satrap Yan watched the carriage leave and couldn't help but sigh. Workshop owner Su was about the same age as his daughter, but she was experienced in dealing with people. She didn't look like a naive girl at all. Besides, Hongshou said that her embroidery skills were also top-notch. It was the first time for him to see such a genius. The world is so vast and full of strange things. Yan Shishuan sighed and turned back to the house. He continued to worry about the Jin family. Su Li returned to the courtyard of the school. Mammy Li looked at Su Li's pale face and shed tears. After helping Su Li lie down, she immediately went out to buy chicken, duck and fish. She was going to make soup for Su Li to nourish her body. When Ruomin, Feng Qingru and others received the news, but they didn't come to see Su Li at the first time. Instead, they chose to send tonics to let Su Li have a good rest for a period of time. It was not too late to bother Su Li when she was almost well. I didn't expect that such a thing happened. Fortunately, Su Li was lucky and was not killed by Enchanting. When Ruomin calmed down and said to Gong Xiangjuan, who was lying in a coma on the bed. Gong Xiangjuan moved her eyes. It seemed that she wanted to open them, but she couldn't. Gong Min smiled bitterly and said, Grandma Wan, don't work in vain. Grandma can hear you, but she can't open her eyes or speak. Many doctors in the city have come to take a look, but none of them can explain what happened. When Ruomin sighed deeply, this kind of strange disease is really rare. Fortunately, your grandma can still bear it. I will find another famous doctor. Unfortunately, the legendary great Dr. Qi has been missing for many years. Some people even say that he has passed away. If you can ask him for help, your grandmother will definitely be cured. Gong Min immediately felt helpless. How could she meet that kind of genius doctor just because she wanted to? Even if she met him, he might not necessarily help her. The temperament of genius doctors was very strange. After Su Li returned to the courtyard, she didn't need to hide anymore. She immediately ran the Ghost Valley meditation direction to heal herself. The Ghost Valley meditation direction deserved to be the holy book of medicine. In less than 2 days, she felt that the wounds in her body were almost healed, leaving only superficial wounds. Of course, this was also related to her innate physique. If she was still in the acquired realm, she would need at least half a month to recuperate. After the injury was almost healed, Su Li returned to the Linli building and was immediately surrounded by Fang Yuan and others. How are your injuries? Fong Yuan stared at Su Li's pale face and couldn't help but care about her. It's no big deal. Su Li didn't seem to see the concern in Fong Yuan's eyes and replied lightly. Then she immediately asked about the situation of the Linli building these days. According to your instructions, I have divided the osmanthus wine into 3 grades. When Yin Shuadong talked about the specific matters, she was full of confidence. She said, the first grade osmanthus wine is the raw liquor with extremely high degree. Those who are weak will be drunk after 1 cup. This kind of wine is sold as a gimmick. I price a pot of 100,000 taels. The second grade osmanthus wine is the liquor after being diluted 100 times. The price is 1,000 taels. The third grade osmanthus wine is the one we sold before. The original price remains the same. Miss Su Li, what do you think? Su Li nodded gently and thought for a moment. She said, well done. How much profit has the winery made during this period? 245,000 taels. Yin Shuadong immediately replied, this is the pure profit. We have earned back all the cost of building the winery. Chu Qingning, Haydn and others couldn't help but be speechless. It was too horrible to recover the cost in 1 month. Very good. Next, we should prepare for the expansion. Su Li glanced at the people present and said roughly. Then she pointed to Fong Yuan and said, Fong Yuan, you stay here. Others can leave. Chu Qingning smiled and secretly gave Fong Yuan a thumbs up. He took everyone out of the addendum. Fong Yuan was also nervous. When everyone left, he couldn't help but ask, what do you want me to do here? What do you think? Su Li smiled gently. Fong Yuan blushed and was slightly annoyed. He said, don't make fun of me. Okay. Su Li shrugged indifferently and said, the thing about Jinqing AO is not finished yet. You go to Yenzai today. So, Fong Yuan's expression changed slightly. He didn't understand why Su Li was so persistent about the Jin family. Do you have to kill them all? Holding the secret letter in his hand, Fong Yuan looked up at the dim night. He thought of the lust in Jinqing AO's eyes that day. Finally, he did not hesitate to disappear into the night. In the dungeon of the provincial office, begging for mercy and roaring were heard day after day. In the past 2 days, the roaring was much louder than usual. Let me out. Why do you catch me? I said that I didn't kill Su Li at all. The sword hid it by itself. The burning anger in Jinqing AO's eyes had already made him lose his mind. As arrogant as he was, how could he bear the word prisoner? It was inconsistent with his identity and his state of mind. The jailer impatiently scratched his ear and couldn't help but say, First Master Jin, you'd better stop for a while. If you want to prove your innocence, you should think of a decent reason. The sword hid it by itself. Do you think everyone is a fool? It's really ridiculous. What I said is true. Jinqing AO roared madly, why don't you believe me? Ha 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 ha. After he said that, the jailer sneered, which made Jinqing AO angrier. He didn't understand why he was so angry, but he was angry. Once this kind of anger was generated, it couldn't be stopped. He couldn't calm down and think about the problem at all. He had already understood that he must have been tricked, but what scared him was that he couldn't control his emotions at all. At this time, the sound of the prison chain came into his ears. Jinqing AO sensitively raised his head and revealed a pair of scarlet eyes. Yen Zai, who came in, was shocked as if he was stared at by a beast. However, it didn't prevent him from completing the order of Mr. Li. Yen Zai showed a sarcastic smile and said, Jinqing AO, I didn't expect that you would be so arrogant. Aren't you proud? Today you are a prisoner. Let's see how you can be arrogant. Yen. See. Yi. Jin Cheng Ao's face was distorted like a devil in hell. He was full of hatred. He struggled hard and the chains on his limbs suddenly rattled. He said, "If you dare to say one more word, I will kill you. I'm really scared." Yen Zai looked indifferent and sat in front of Jin Cheng Ao. He said, "I'm sitting here. Come and kill me. You are cruel and worse than pigs and dogs. It's not enough to hurt workshop owner Su. Do you want to kill me in the provincial office?" Yen Zai sneered and felt very happy. Mr. Li's order was to let him come to the dungeon to humiliate Jin Cheng Ao. He wanted to do this kind of thing. In the martial arts competition last year, Jin Cheng Ao not only defeated him, but also humiliated him in front of everyone and broke one of his legs. If his father didn't spend a lot of money to buy the magical plaster from Yunjing, he would have been a useless person now. How could such hatred disappear just like that? Aw 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 aw. Jin Cheng Ao struggled crazily. A layer of stone powder fell from the wall, but he still couldn't break free. Yen Zai. I will kill you. I will kill all of you. Yen Shixuan, Su Li, wait and see. Yen Zai was horrified. Was Jin Cheng Ao crazy? Why did he look abnormal? However, when he saw Jin Cheng Ao being so embarrassed, he felt more comfortable. He even felt that there was a sign of progress in his cultivation. Jin Cheng Ao, why are you still struggling? You intend to kill the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop in the provincial city. It's a big crime. Even your father can't save you. As long as my father reports to Yunjing, you will be executed immediately. There is no other end. Yen Zai's cruel words were like the tip of a knife stabbing into Jin Cheng Ao's heart. It made Jin Cheng Ao tremble all over. Then, a breath like a storm drowned Yen Zai. What is this? Jin Cheng Ao. Yen Zai was terrified. In his eyes, the walls suddenly cracked like a spider web, and then, boom. The whole dungeon seemed to have an earthquake. Large pieces of the wall that locked the chain fell. Yen Zai was hit carelessly and fainted directly. The dungeon was in chaos in an instant. Jin Cheng Ao saw the consequences caused by his bursting power. His eyes suddenly became clear. The effect of Su Li's medicine had passed. I broke through. The peak of the acquired realm. Jin Cheng Ao was ecstatic. Immediately, he saw Yen Zai, who was pressed under the stone and kept vomiting blood. His pupils shrank immediately. In addition to Yen Zai's life, he would definitely be executed by Yen Shixuan immediately. No. I want to escape. When I reach the inborn realm and come back, even Yen Shixuan can't control me. Thinking of this, Jin Cheng Ao jumped out of the stone wall. He wore a prisoner's uniform and quickly blended into the night. He fled to the wilderness. Feeling the harsh wind in his ears, Jin Cheng Ao was full of excitement. This is the peak of the acquired realm. When my AO sword skills are further improved, I can tie with the general warriors of the inborn realm without breaking through the inborn realm. Qinghe Province, Yen Shixuan. It won't take long for me to get back at you. Suddenly, a ray of light seemed to shoot from the sky. Before Jin Cheng Ao could react, it penetrated his chest and blasted a fist-sized hole in his chest. Jin Cheng Ao staggered and fell into the dust. He lost his heart and instantly died. His eyes were wide open. There was a little disbelief in his eyes. It seemed that he didn't expect that he would die in such an unknown way. Under the moonlight, Su Li with a pale face walked over with a long bow in her hand. She muttered to the corpse. In the previous life, you did carry forward the AO sword skills and became a senior at the peak of the inborn realm. You forced the daughter of the Yen family to marry. Yen Hongxiu was tortured to death by you. However, you were too arrogant. You offended too many people in the martial arts circle. Soon, you got into trouble. You died, at the age of 30. However, your AO sword skills soon had a successor. This successor was not someone else. He was the beggar who found the secret when he collected your corpse. Therefore, your name was left in the biography of the martial arts circle. Although you only lived for 30 years, you became a shining legend in the martial arts circle. In this life, Suli said and gently put the bound next to the corpse. She split the soul of Jin Qing AO Shu with a sword. I will accept your AO sword skills. A thin piece of paper fell from the inside of the soul to the ground. Chapter 103. When Suli returned to the Linli building, the news that Jin Qing AO fled for fear of punishment had spread all over the city. It not only made the Yen family angry, but also caught the Jin family off guard. They never expected that Jin Qing AO would despise the laws of the Dehan country and escape from the prison. Moreover, he seriously injured the third child of the Yen family. It was said that the third child was dying. Such a change made Jin Jintian realize that the Jin family and the Yen family had completely gone to the opposite side, and there was no room for turning back. Qing Ao's martial arts talent is very strong. It doesn't matter if he escapes. Jin Jintian looked up at the sky and sighed. He was not sure to deal with the attack of the Yen family. Although he was shocked and surprised that Jin Qing AO could escape from the prison, he was more happy and gratified. He knew that his son hid a secret from him, and it must be related to the martial arts circle. Jin Qing AO could break the prison of the satrap's mansion with bare hands, which meant that he had reached the peak of the acquired realm. As long as he could go further, no matter which country he goes to, the inborn senior will be respected. At that time, my son's mistake will be reduced to a small one. No one can do anything about it. The more Jin Jintian thought, the more excited he was. But he didn't know that Jin Qing AO had become a pool of blood because of Su Li. At the same time, the satrap's mansion was filled with a faint anxiety. Yan Shixuan stood outside the door with a gloomy face. He watched the maids bring out basins of blood from the room, but he didn't see the doctor come out. Madame Yan and Yan Hongxiu stood aside with red eyes. This bastard. Why did he provoke Jin Qing AO? His life is in danger. Yan Shixuan couldn't help but scold. Mrs. Yan wiped her tears and said sadly, Lord, at this time, why do you blame the third brother? God bless my son. He must be fine. Jin Qing AO. Yan Hongxiu's eyes were burning with hatred. She said, if I knew that he would hurt the third brother, I should have killed him directly. After 2 consecutive shocks, Yan Hongxiu's resentment towards Jin Qing AO had reached the extreme. If Jin Qing AO hadn't disappeared, she would have rushed into the dungeon with a knife without saying a word. When the 3 of them were waiting anxiously, the sweating doctor finally came out of the room. Yan Shixuan and the other 2 immediately greeted him. Dr. Lin, how's my son? Dr. Lin looked at the 3 people's eager eyes, but he couldn't help sighing, your young master is not as lucky as workshop owner Su. His ribs were broken by the big stone, and one of them happened to pierce into his lungs. I'm afraid, what? Yan Shixuan and the other 2 felt as if they had been struck by lightning, and their faces instantly turned pale. Zai, Lady Yan let out a sorrowful cry. Her eyes rolled back and she fainted. The maidservants were in a flurry. Dr. Lin quickly went forward and pinched her philtrum. Not long after, Lady Yen regained consciousness, but her face was full of tears and she could no longer speak. Lord Yen, there's nothing I can do. It's better to prepare for the young master as soon as possible. Dr. Lin sighed, as if he was too ashamed to stay here any longer. He picked up the medicine box and left in a hurry. Walking into the room, Yen Shixuan stood in front of the window and looked at Yen Zai, who was lying on the bed like a piece of golden paper. Yen Shixuan pursed his lips and felt his hands and feet go cold. In his life, he had experienced all kinds of despair, but none had been as heart-wrenching and bone-chilling as this one. It happened so suddenly that it was too late for Qing Ni and others to come back to see Zai for the last time. Is there really no other way? Yen Shixuan clenched his fists and made a cracking sound. Tap, 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 Yen Hongxiu walked in step by step. She leaned against the bed and stared at Yen Zai blankly. Tears flowed out of her red and swollen eyes. She carefully held Yen Zai's cold hands and whispered with trembling lips, "Third brother, don't you like Hongxiu the most? Open your eyes quickly and look at me. Thanks to you, my archery has improved a lot recently." Suddenly, Yen Hongxiu seemed to think of something. She was slightly startled and immediately let go of Zai's hands. She turned around and grabbed Yen Shixuan's sleeves. "Father, I have a way. Go and find the immortal master. She must have a way to save the third brother. Father, go with me to find the immortal master." Yen Shixuan was shocked by Yen Hongxiu's sudden madness. After hearing his daughter's words, he looked more confused. Immortal master? Who was that? Was it possible that Hongxiu became his disciple? That was too reckless. Why didn't she mention it to him? "Father, don't hesitate anymore." Seeing that her father didn't move, Yen Hongxiu suddenly broke down and said, "The immortal master also knows the third brother. She is such a powerful person. She will definitely help him." Yen Shixuan was awakened by Yen Hongxiu. He immediately held her hands and said, "Okay. There's no time to lose. Lead the way to that otherworldly expert immediately." He could already imagine that the so-called master of Yen Hongxiu must be an immortal senior. Such a person might really have a way. No, no, no. She is in the Linli building. She is the boss of the Linli building. Yen Hongxiu was so anxious that she burst into tears and said, "The immortal master said that I can't tell others about the relationship. I have violated the agreement and can't take more people there. Father, let me go with you to find her." The boss of the Linli building. Yen Shixuan was even more surprised. If he remembered correctly, the boss of the Linli building was a young woman. Although she never showed up, he knew that the woman was definitely younger than him from her figure. Could she help to cure Zai's injury? Yen Shixuan was deeply doubtful, but there was no other way. He didn't hesitate too much and immediately took Yen Hongxiu to go to the Linli building for help. But before they went out of the yard, a servant came to report, "Master, the boss of the Linli building came to visit. She said that she had something important to discuss with you." She actually came by herself. Yen Shixuan's hurried expression was slightly stagnant. He immediately said, "Invite her in. The immortal master is coming." Yen Hongxiu turned from sadness to joy. Since she saw Su Li's magical means, she had a blind confidence in Su Li. After a short while, Su Li dressed as Ms. Li came to the yard. When she saw Yen Shixuan, she bowed slightly and said quickly, "Satrap Yen, I take the liberty to visit you. Please forgive me. I heard that the third master of the Linli building was seriously injured and the doctors were helpless. I have a relationship with the third master of the Linli building. Can I have a try?" Su Li directly told the purpose of her visit. Yen Shixuan was immediately happy and said quickly, "Come on. Ms. Li, please come in. My son is in danger. I won't be polite. If my son can survive, I will repay you. Suli was a little surprised. She looked at Yen Hongxiu, who was avoiding her eyes. She immediately understood that the relationship between her and the brother and sister of the Yen family had been exposed. She didn't say anything and stepped into the room. Yen Shixuan immediately followed her. Seeing Yen Zai lying on the bed, Suli sighed in her heart. She just let Yen Zai stimulate the last power of the medicine in Jin Qing Ao's body and let him break the chain and escape. But she didn't expect that Jin Qing Ao directly broke through to the peak of the acquired realm. Yen Zai almost died because of her. Although she was reborn and her medical circle and poison circle had reached the sublime realm, she was not a god. Naturally, she couldn't calculate all the possibilities in the world. Fortunately, Yen Zai's injury was not serious in her eyes. This mistake could be corrected. Ms. Li, how is my son? Can he be saved? Seeing that Suli didn't speak for a long time, Yen Shixuan couldn't help but ask. Suli came to her sense and nodded slightly. She said softly, Lord Yen, please be at ease. Your son broke 3 ribs and hurt his lungs. It is impossible for ordinary people. Fortunately, your son has practiced a little Xiangong and can hold on. I know a little about medical circle. This injury can be cured. That's good. Yen Shixuan breathed a long sigh of relief. Then he immediately realized something and exclaimed, Xiangong. Zai has practiced Xiangong. I didn't. If it is convenient for Lord Yen, please leave. I am going to perform acupuncture. I can't be disturbed by others. Suli interrupted Yen Shixuan faintly. Yen Shixuan woke up and apologized. He left the room without saying anything. He was afraid that his son would be disturbed by Suli. Back to the door, Yen Shixuan still frowned. No matter how he thought, he couldn't understand how his son secretly learned his Xiangong. He didn't leave any book record and didn't pass it on to anyone. That Xiangong was a secret that couldn't be mentioned to anyone. Ms. Li also knows Xiangong. Could it be? Various speculations appeared in Yen Shixuan's mind. Suddenly, he caught a glimpse of Yen Hongxiu, who was leaning on the window and peeping. He immediately covered Yen Hongxiu's mouth and carried her down from the window. After walking far away, he asked, Xiu, do you know anything about the background of your master? Yen Hongxiu was relieved when her father put her down. She rolled her eyes and said, Dad, you really scared me. I don't know the background of the immortal master. Besides, she only promised to teach me archery. She didn't let me worship her as a master. It's good that you didn't worship her as a master. Yen Shixuan breathed a sigh of relief. There were many rules in the martial arts circle. A teacher for a day was a father for a lifetime. If Hongxiu really worshipped her as a master, the relationship between the Yen family and Ms. Li would be too close. However, I heard from the 3rd brother that the immortal master is a great senior. Yen Hongxiu proudly counted her fingers and said, I remember that she is called inborn senior. Although I don't know what it means, the immortal master is really powerful. She can shoot through the target at once. Well, she's really powerful. Yen Shixuan was still absent-minded. He gradually recalled the whole sentence of Yen Hongxiu. His heart couldn't stop beating. He couldn't help but grab Yen Hongxiu's shoulder. He stared at her and confirmed again, Xiu, what did you say? Inborn senior. Are you sure you didn't hear it wrong? Dad, you hurt me. Yen Hongxiu struggled for a while and said angrily, I am not deaf. The 3rd brother repeated it to me many times. How could I hear it wrong? Yen Shixuan was stunned. He thought that he was just a few feet away from Suli. What they said before might have been heard by her. His face immediately darkened. This bastard has grown up. He not only learned Xiangong secretly but also got acquainted with an inborn senior quietly. He didn't tell me about these things. When he recovers, I will beat him to the point that he can't get down. How dare he? Chapter 104. Squeak, the door was gently pushed open. Su Li poked her head out, but she didn't see Yan Shixuan and Yan Hongxiu. She couldn't help but feel strange. She was concentrating on treating Yan Zai just now. How could she have time to listen to Yan Shixuan's words? This. Miss. At this time, Mrs. Yan hurried in. She couldn't help but be stunned when she saw Su Li. Then she quickly quickened her pace and walked to Su Li. She asked eagerly, "How is Zai? Can I go in and have a look?" She was told by the maids that a young doctor volunteered to treat Yan Zai. She immediately ignored the advice of the maids. She directly got up from the bed and ran to Yan Zai despite her dizziness. Her heart sank when she saw Su Li. Although Su Li wore a veil, she could see at a glance that Su Li was not old. How could such a young girl have such high medical skills? Su Li looked at Mrs. Yan with a gentle smile on her face. She said, "Your child is fine. It is estimated that he will wake up in a few hours. Please go in and sit down and wait." Okay. Mrs. Yan didn't believe Su Li's words at all. She answered perfunctorily and walked in with red eyes. Su Li was not angry. She tidied up her clothes and left the Yan mansion with the medicine box without disturbing anyone. Mrs. Yan walked into the room and was surprised to see Yan Zai on the bed. She clearly remembered that Zai's face was as white as a piece of paper before, but now it was very ruddy. It seemed that Zai was not in a coma but sleeping. Could it be that the lady just now really has some ability? Mrs. Yan's eyes were faintly shaken. At this time, Yan Zai snorted. Mrs. Yan immediately looked up and saw that Yan Zai's eyelashes trembled and he opened his eyes. "Yi, you wake up." Mrs. Yan was overjoyed. She immediately ran out to inform Yan Shixuan, "Master, Zai woke up." He woke up. Yan Zai looked at the top of the bed. His eyes were blank. "Where am I?" "Yes, I stimulated Jin Qing AO in the dungeon." Unexpectedly, his Xiangong broke through and collapsed the dungeon. "I am still alive." Yan Zai raised his hand and found that it was not as weak as he imagined. But his chest was still aching. "My injuries." Yan Zai touched his chest with a look of surprise. The moment he was hit, he knew that he was done for. He would either die or be seriously injured and become a cripple. But the pain in his body told him that his injury was not serious. He would probably be full of vigor after recuperating for half a month. "Zai!" Yan Shixuan's voice came from the door. The back door was opened. Yan Hongxiu and Mrs. Yan also arrived. "Father." Yan Zai looked ashamed and said, "I was wrong. I didn't expect that Jin Qing AO almost broke through the peak of the acquired realm. I just scolded him a little." "You." Yan Shixuan was so angry that he didn't know what to say. This brat had just crawled back from the gates of hell. Could it be that he could give him a heavier punishment? Forget it, forget it. I'll let this matter go. If Mr. Li didn't come in time, you would have been dead already. Yan Shixuan snorted coldly, flicked his sleeves and left. Lady Yan, on the other hand, was beaming with joy. The old master really had a sharp tongue but a soft heart. He was already so anxious earlier, but now he was still pretending to be calm. Did Mr. Li come? Yan Zai was stunned and immediately smiled bitterly. He said, "No wonder. I knew that my injury was not so light." The immortal master came by himself. Yan Hongshou said with a smile, "It seems that the third brother has a high position in Mr. Li's mind. I just begged you to find the immortal master. I didn't expect that the immortal master had already arrived. Fortunately, the girl was a miraculous doctor and saved your life. You should thank her." Lady Yan said with a serious face, "Do you know that when Dr. Lin asked us to prepare for your funeral, my heart was almost broken. Don't mess around in the future. Your life is the most important." Facing his mother's warning, Yan Zai felt guilty and scared. He said, "Mother, don't worry. I will do what I can in the future. Tell me in detail. How did you know Mr. Li?" Yan Shixuan saw that his son was in good spirits and couldn't help asking. It was in the prisoner camp. Yan Zai remembered the scene on that day and immediately said. After Su Li returned to the Linli building, her days returned to peace. After the incident of Jin Qing A.O., the contradiction between the Yan family and the Jin family was public. The Jin family didn't dare to be as arrogant as before. Everything was as usual in the Linli building and the embroidery workshop. No one deliberately made trouble. Su Li didn't need to take care of the courses in the school because of her injury. Therefore, Su Li stayed in the Linli building these days and asked Fang Yuan to find a craftsman to build a set of distillation equipment mentioned by her husband in the previous life. "Su Li, what are you building this thing for? It looks weird." Chu Qingning ran over and looked at the huge thing in the underground addendum. Two barrel-shaped things were connected by long pipes. He didn't know what they were used for. "Of course, it is used to make wine." Su Li smiled slightly and answered simply without explaining. "This?" Chu Qingning was confused and asked, "It can make wine. You will know when the new wine comes out. I will teach you how to use it." Su Li checked the equipment and confirmed that it was well sealed. Then she turned around and began to prepare the rice wine. "Sister Li, isn't this ordinary rice wine? I think it can be sold in the market." Fang Ling helped Su Li and complained, "If this kind of wine is sold in our store, it will lower the level of our store." "Ling, don't talk nonsense. Su Li must have a special way." Yin Shuadong glanced at Su Li, who was busy and didn't speak, and reminded her in a low voice. Fang Ling stuck out her tongue and didn't speak immediately. After the rice was fermented, Su Li wiped her face and said with a smile, "You will know when the rice wine is brewed. Ling, you should follow my steps these days and brew more and store it in the warehouse. Remember to mark the date." "Okay." Fang Ling nodded hurriedly. She always carried out Su Li's orders unconditionally. "Shuadong, you might as well announce the news of the new wine. I think these wines will be on the market in a few days." Yin Shuadong heard Su Li's words and nodded slightly. Then he couldn't help but ask, "What is our new wine?" "I'm afraid that it will not have a big impact if we just say it vaguely." Su Li tilted her head and thought for a while. Then she said, "Just add one word." After that, she wrote a word on the ground with a little water. Then she turned around and left without saying anything. Yin Shuadong looked at the word on the ground and looked more confused. "Strong? What kind of wine is it? It seems that there is no strong wine in Dehan country." After dealing with the chores, Su Li returned to the top floor and opened the window to look at the direction of the satrap's mansion. She was waiting for someone. With her movement technique, she could heal Yan Zai's injuries without anyone noticing, and then leave quietly. But she chose to go above board. In this way, the news that Ms. Li was a medical master would be spread to Wen Ruomin soon. Gong Xiangjuan hadn't heard from her for half a month. She didn't believe that when Ruomin wouldn't come to her after the news that Yen Zai was seriously injured was spread. This time, I just want to return Feng Qingru's favor. If not, I don't need to be so troublesome. Su Li sighed in her heart and showed a complex expression. But the favor was the most difficult to return. She wanted Feng Qingru to be the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop according to the track of her previous life and let her live without regret. If he could do that, then he would be able to repay her favor. Su Li thought in her heart. But in the next 7 days, she waited for a long time and didn't see anyone visit the Linli building, which made her feel uneasy. Did something happen to Gong Xiangjuan? Or Gong Xiangjuan was dead. Su Li's eyes were slightly gloomy and she turned to go downstairs. Less than an hour later, she had restored her original identity and appeared in the courtyard of the school. Go to see Dean Gong. I haven't heard from her for a long time. I'm worried. When Su Li walked out of the door, Xiaowu and Datian, who had been worried for many days, were happy. They immediately hesitated and said, Lord, your injury, it doesn't matter. Su Li smiled and shook her head. She said, I have been recuperating for many days. Although I can't take the carriage for a long time, it is not a problem for me to travel such a short distance. Since you said so, Lord. Xiaowu gritted his teeth and led a carefully modified carriage. The carriage was covered with layers of flannels, which greatly reduced the vibration. This is a little gift from Datian and me, hee. Xiaowu scratched his head and blushed. He smiled embarrassedly. Su Li was stunned and immediately showed a gentle smile. She said, thank you. Let's go. Okay. Xiaowu and Datian immediately jumped on the carriage and gently whipped the horse's buttocks. The carriage immediately drove into the forest. Noticing that Xiaowu deliberately slowed down the speed, Su Li was more silent. A strange feeling rose from the bottom of her heart. In the previous life, she was used to deception. No matter who she faced, she was always very vigilant. She was afraid that she had no luck to enjoy the simple enthusiasm of Xiaowu and Datian. Xiaowu, which village did you say you came from? When Xiaowu heard Su Li's question, he immediately laughed and said, Lord, Datian and I are both from a small fishing village by the river outside the Qinghe town. It is very remote and the villagers are not rich. Both of us are orphans who grew up there. We can't read a few words. Sorry to make you laugh at us. When Su Li heard that, she slightly pursed her mouth and immediately said, I'm quite curious after hearing what you said. If you are free, why don't you take me to your village to have a look? Xiaowu was overjoyed when he heard that. That's great. If we can go back with you, we can return to our hometown in glory. Speaking of which, we haven't seen the village head for many years. Speaking of this, Xiaowu suddenly felt that it was inappropriate. He hesitated and said, Lord, I'm afraid not. I'm afraid that it's not safe for you to go there with your appearance. Don't worry. I'll take guards with me. Su Li dispelled Xiaowu's doubts. Datian grinned from ear to ear. It was great to take the opportunity to go back and have a look. With the protection of guards, they didn't have to worry about being robbed by thieves. Su Li sat in the carriage and her eyes were gloomy. The idea of going to Xiaowu's hometown to have a look just emerged in her mind. If these two people were willing, it would be better to give them a good fortune. However, everything had not been decided yet. She had to go to the small fishing village to make a decision. Lord, we have arrived at the courtyard of Dean Gong. Xiaowu's voice came. Su Li walked out of the carriage and approached the courtyard. She immediately frowned. In addition to the Numas of Gong Min, Gong Xiangjuan, Wen Ruomin and Feng Qingru, there were others. When the maids at the door saw Su Li coming, they immediately saluted. They knew the relationship between Su Li and Gong Xiangjuan, so they immediately took Suli into the courtyard without informing her. After Suli followed them across a courtyard gate, the vague voice in the courtyard suddenly became clear. Chapter 105. Inside the room, it was still the same as last time. However, Gong Xiangjuan was not in front of the desk, but lying on the bed. Feng Qingru and Gong Min sat on one side respectively. Wen Ruomin sat on the armchair beside the bed. The three of them glared at the plump woman standing in the room. Second mother, it was you who made Grandma go away. Now you want her to go back with illness. Gong Min was not as gentle as before. Her eyes were full of resentment and hatred. She said, I want to ask you. What is your intention? The plump woman was Wu Yun, the second madam of the Gong family. Wen Ruomin sat aside and breathed quickly. She was not a member of the Gong family, so it was not appropriate for her to intervene in this matter. But if Wu Yun really wanted to take away Gong Min and Gong Xiangjuan forcibly, she would never sit idly by. Wu Yun seemed to be touched by Gong Min. She looked slightly annoyed, but she returned to normal in an instant. She even said with a little apology, Min. You also know that I was young and aggressive at that time. It was all the consequences of impulsiveness. Now I know that I was wrong. Can't you forgive me? Gong Min's eyes were very cold, as if she did not see the apology on Wu Yun's face. She said, some things are wrong. If you admit your mistake now, can you save my mother's life? Wu Yun's tail seemed to be stepped on by a cat. She was angry and screamed, Gong Min. I didn't kill your mother. How many times do you want me to say that before you believe it? I will never believe it. Gong Min leaned over the bed and said resolutely and crisply, go away. As long as you are still in that home, Grandma and I will never go back. Wu Yun stopped breathing. The hypocritical expression on her face was like a piece of paper being torn. Her expression was slightly distorted. When Ruomin saw that the situation was not good, she immediately stood up and shouted coldly, Wu Yun. This is not the Wu mansion or the Gong mansion. What do you want to do? Believe it or not, I will call someone to drive you out. Wu Yun stopped and her chest trembled with anger. She said, good. 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 Very good, Gong Min, you are very good. Let's forget about today. Since I have come to Qinghe town, don't think that I will give up so easily. Let's wait and see. Wu Yun glared at Gong Xiangjuan on the bed and immediately left. She glanced at Suli in front of the door and snorted coldly. She warned, if anyone comes to see the old lady of the Gong family after today, don't blame me for being merciless. Suli smiled gently and walked in without looking at Wu Yun. Wu Yunfeng's eyes widened in anger, and her face turned pale. She didn't mind the Gong family. But how could a little student of the Qinghe girls' school despise her? How preposterous. All of you, just you wait. Wu Yun roared madly and left the courtyard with her people. The remaining three people all smiled and felt that this scene was really refreshing. Suli, why are you here? How are your injuries? Gong Min forced a smile as she wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes. Suli shook her head and smiled warmly, it's no big deal. I heard that Dean Gong also fell ill. I feel better these days, so I come to see her. By the way, just now. When Ruomin sighed and shook her head, little girl Sue, you shouldn't get involved in this. That woman is not easy to deal with, but she married into the Gong family in Yunjing. Now the backyard of the Gong family belongs to her. Even Dean Gong was driven out by her. The Gong family in Yunjing. Suli said in surprise. She was really surprised. In the previous life, she had no contact with Gong Xiangjuan. How could she know her specific origin? Yes, the Gong family is a big family in Yunjing. When Ruomin explained in detail, the big families in Yunjing are inextricably linked with the imperial court. You can't offend them. You have offended Wu Yun just now. She will definitely hold a grudge and make trouble for you in the future. Even the Qinghe girls' school can't help you. Wen Ruomin said helplessly. Gong Min and Feng Qingru were even more depressed. Seeing this, Su Li immediately comforted her. Dean Wen, you don't have to think so far. I turned misfortune into blessing this time. My luck is not bad. Don't worry about me. The most urgent thing is the illness of Dean Gong. I heard from the mammy that the third son of the satrap was almost killed by Jin Qing A.O., but he was saved later. Why don't we try our luck? That's what I want to do. When Ruomin's eyes brightened when she heard Su Li's words. She said, although the satrap doesn't seem to want to say more for fear of offending that person. I learned from the servants in their mansion that the mysterious boss of the Linli building cured the third son of the Yen family. I intend to send someone to invite him, but I have been harassed by Wu Yun all day these days. I can't get away. I see. Su Li suddenly understood and then suggested, if you don't mind, Dean Wen, why don't you write a letter? I happen to go back to the courtyard on the way. Let Xiaowu take the letter to avoid being noticed by Wu Yun. That's great. When Ruomin immediately got up and walked to the desk. She wrote a letter quickly and gave it to Su Li. She said, thank you. You should be careful. Okay. Without much delay, Su Li went back to the Linli building on the grounds that she was not feeling well. She handed the letter to Xiaowu. Xiaowu naturally went to the Linli building without stopping. Su Li arranged a contingency in the Linli building. Xiaowu quickly got the reply and rushed back to Gong Xiangjuan's courtyard. When Ruomin saw that Xiaowu was so efficient and praised him in her heart, she immediately opened the reply letter. Thank you for your kindness. I will visit you tonight and treat the Dean Gong. When Ruomin was overjoyed after reading the short sentence, she said, he agreed. Mr. Li is really merciful. He agreed immediately. Gong Min stayed at the bedside and couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. It was rumored that Mr. Li was mysterious and had superb medical skills. Even if he couldn't completely cure her grandma, he could tell what disease her grandma had. Su Li returned to the Linli building from the courtyard and took the medicine box hidden in the underground addendum. Then she dressed up as Mr. Li and came to the gate of the school. It was getting dark. There were already people waiting at the gate of the school. Seeing Su Li's iconic white dress, two people immediately greeted her and said respectfully, "Are you Mr. Li?" Su Li nodded slightly. The two people were overjoyed and immediately let Su Li get on the carriage. Then they drove all the way to Gong Xiangjuan's courtyard. There was no accident on the way. Su Li returned to Gong Xiangjuan's courtyard. Her pneuma and expression had changed, so people who were familiar with her couldn't see any clue. Mr. Li, you finally come. When Ruomin stood in front of the door and saw that Mr. Li was a young woman, she was slightly surprised, but she quickly reacted and came out to greet Mr. Li calmly. Su Li smiled gently and said in a strange tone, "Dean Wen, you don't have to be so polite. It's not too late. I will go in and treat Dean Gong." Seeing that Su Li was so straightforward, Wen Ruomin was also relieved. She had no time to doubt Su Li's medical skills. Then she stepped aside to let Su Li go in. "Hello, Mr. Li." When Gong Min saw Su Li in white with a veil on her face come in, she was stunned. But she reacted quickly and immediately gave way to Su Li so that Su Li could feel Gong Xiangjuan's pulse. At this time, it was meaningless to doubt Su Li. It was better to let Su Li diagnose and see the result. Suli felt Gong Xiangjuan's pulse and immediately frowned. Her inference was right. In the previous life, Gong Xiangjuan was poisoned to death. But in this life, she was affected by Suli and showed symptoms in advance. Suli thought and slowly let go of her hand to feel the pulse. Gong Min, who was worried, waited for a moment and finally couldn't help asking, "Mr. Li, what disease does my grandma have? Do you have?" "Miss Gong, calm down. Let me ask you a few questions." Suli raised her hand to stop Gong Min from asking more questions. She asked, "Who is responsible for Dean Gong's daily food and drink?" Gong Min's face turned pale and she said, "Mr. Li, you mean, yes." Suli nodded slightly and said, "Dean Gong is not sick, but poisoned." As soon as Suli said that, the three people present all turned pale with horror. Even Gong Xiangjuan's eyes moved violently. Dean Gong didn't offend anyone. How could she be poisoned? When Ruomin suddenly thought of something, her face immediately became gloomy. It seems that Dean Wen has gained something. Suli sighed softly and said, "A few days ago, the lecturer of your school, Suli, was arrested, which coincided with the time when Dean Gong fell ill. Don't you have any ideas?" "The Jin family." Wen Ruomin looked pale. She didn't expect that the Jin family was so crazy that they even dared to kill Gong Xiangjuan for an embroidery workshop. Weren't they afraid that the Gong family would get even with them? Suli said at this time, in fact, the Jin family had a sense of propriety. But they didn't expect that there was hidden poison in Dean Gong's body for many years. The toxicity of the new poison was not strong, but it triggered the outbreak of the hidden poison. That made Dean Gong fall into the current strange symptoms. Every sentence of Su Li's analysis was like reeling silk from cocoons, which made everyone understand. "You mean?" When Ruomin's tone became more and more difficult, there was poison in Dean Gong's body. Gong Min's face was pale and she breathed quickly. She seemed to think of something and the flickering light in her eyes became darker. Suli glanced at Gong Min and immediately nodded and said, "Yes. This kind of hidden poison needs the poisoner to be very patient. The poisoner has been poisoned for many years to have an effect. Once it accumulates to a certain extent, it will immediately break out and kill people. It looks like a sudden death. The reason can't be found at all." When Ruomin's hands and feet were cold when she heard it. She looked at Gong Xiangjuan who couldn't move on the bed and felt scared. In this way, the poison of the Jin family saved her elder sister's life. If the poison hadn't been drawn out in advance and Mr. Li came to see it, the elder sister would have died suddenly. Hearing the word "died suddenly," Gong Min tightly grasped the bed sheet. Her face was as pale as snow and even her lips were pale. Feng Qingru noticed something strange and immediately held Gong Min for fear that she would fall down. Seeing such a reaction, it was not difficult for Suli to guess that Gong Min's mother might have died suddenly. It was likely that the person who poisoned Gong Xiangjuan was the same person. If both Gong Min's mother and Gong Xiangjuan died, who could get benefits? She didn't need to think to know that it was Wu Yun during the day. It turns out that people surnamed Wu are all bad. Thinking of this, Suli showed a cold smile at the corner of her mouth. "Mr. Li, can Grandma be saved?" Gong Min's face was pale and she reluctantly asked. She looked at Suli eagerly with fear in her eyes. She was afraid that Suli would shake her head. "Of course, she can be saved." Suli gently stroked Gong Min's head and transferred a trace of vital energy to her, which made Gong Min's face slightly ruddy. "If the hidden poison accumulates enough and breaks out, it may be too late for me to save her. But the current situation is not difficult for me. If Miss Gong trusts me, it is better to send Dean Gong to the Linli building. Detoxification is not a day's work. The poison will even change at any time in the process of detoxification. It is obviously more convenient to send her to me. Gong Min's eyes immediately lit up when she heard this. She said, Mr. Li, please let me go with Grandma. I will pay the full medical expenses. I can also work for the winery. Su Li smiled slightly and was about to agree. Suddenly, she looked cold. Gong Min was at a loss. Suddenly, she saw several cold arrows shot from the beam in the night sky. The targets were Su Li and Gong Xiangjuan, who was lying on the bed. Be careful. Behind. Seeing this scene, Feng Qingru and Gong Min looked shocked and shouted to remind. When Ruomin and Su Li also turned their backs, but they were still at a loss and didn't know what happened. At the moment when Feng Qingru and Gong Min closed their eyes in fear. Ding! 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 Chapter 106. The long sword drew a beautiful arc and flashed several times in Gong Min's eyes with great precision. The tip of the sword seemed to have eyes and actually touched the tips of all the darts. A series of crisp sounds mixed together, and then the darts fell to the ground weakly with tinkling sounds. Damn it! When the man in black saw this scene, he suddenly showed a look as if he had seen a ghost. He was so scared that he ran away without saying anything. But before he took a few steps, a white light flashed in front of him, and Su Li's figure appeared in front of him like a ghost. Su Li snorted coldly. Before the man in black could react, she chopped his neck with one hand. The man suddenly groaned and fell to the ground. A bloody smell suddenly spread. Su Li couldn't help frowning and squatting down to check. The black cloth on the face of the man in black was overflowing with blood. Mist? Su Li was slightly shocked. She uncovered the black cloth and saw a strange and pale face. She pried open the man's teeth and looked carefully. But she didn't see the poison bag. Gong Min and Feng Qingru supported each other to come out. When they saw the dead body on the ground, they immediately felt weak and sat down. Dead, dead. Miss Li, he. Gong Min was frightened. Even when she was in the Gong family in Yunjing, she had never seen a dead person. When she lived in the Qinghe town with her grandma, she had no chance to see such ugly things. Su Li nodded slightly and said in a low voice, I was careless. This person was poisoned. I knocked him out but hit the fatal point of the poison. He died suddenly. There must be a master of poison behind this person. Poison, it was poison again. Gong Min regained her composure. Her childish face was full of hatred. She had already guessed who was behind the killer. At this time, when Ruomin came out with a crutch, she had seen many ups and downs in her life. Her face was just a little pale. She bowed to Su Li and said, This matter frightened Ms. Li. Thanks to Ms. Li's superb martial arts, you would have been killed by the thief today. Su Li threw the bloody scarf on the face of the man in black. She stood up and clapped her hands. She said, It doesn't matter. It's a piece of cake. It's just that after this incident, the academy is no longer safe. Why don't you send Dean Gong to my place tonight? When Ruomin was scared and also shocked by Su Li's strength. There was a martial arts school in the Qinghe school. When Ruomin usually knew about it. But the strength of those martial arts lecturers was totally different from that of Ms. Li. Just thinking about that kind of speed and reflexes made her shudder. It was not something an ordinary martial artist could achieve. It seems that if I want to know more about Mr. Li, I have to go to the satrap's mansion. Thinking of this, when Ruomin slightly bowed and said, Thank you so much for your timely help. Min, hurry up and pack up. We will leave immediately. Gong Min nodded repeatedly, and Feng Qingru followed her to help. She hadn't spoken much since Gong Xiangjuan came to diagnose. Although Gong Xiangjuan was her mentor, she still knew too little about Gong Xiangjuan's family background. Su Li nodded slightly, and there was a hint of contemplation in her eyes. In this way, Gong Xiangjuan's life was saved by her, and she didn't need to worry about Gong Min's safety. Wu Yun couldn't do anything. She would definitely vent her anger on Feng Qingru and her identity. The Feng family, where Feng Qingru came from, was also a famous family in the Qinghe town. As the saying went, a powerful dragon couldn't suppress a snake in its old haunts. Wu Yun couldn't move the forces under her control in Yunjing, so she couldn't do anything to Feng Qingru. In this case, Wu Yun would certainly choose to vent her anger on the weakest persimmon. Thinking of this, Su Li couldn't help but feel a little helpless. She just got rid of the future trouble, Jin Qing Ao. Before she could take a breath, troubles came one after another. It really made her restless. In the previous life, Jin Qing Ao tortured and killed him in the street under the watchful eyes of the public. In this life, there is no Jin Qing Ao, so it will not happen. But, Su Li looked into the distance and looked at Yunjing. There was a hint of worry in her eyes. Under her intervention, the destiny of many people in this life had been completely different. Yan Zai's serious injury was an accident. Presumably, there would be more things that were out of her control in the future. Could she really help him achieve the goal of the previous life? The worry in Su Li's eyes was inadvertently caught by Gong Min. Gong Min suddenly felt puzzled. Would a powerful and extraordinary woman like Ms. Li also have troubles? Was there anything in this world that could stump her? Gong Min was puzzled, but she didn't dare to ask. When the moon was in the middle of the sky, the carriage of the Qinghe school arrived at the Linli building. Maybe Wu Yun was too confident in the killers and didn't notice the change of mind. Or maybe Wu Yun was afraid of Su Li's strength. It was very peaceful along the way, and no killers appeared. Fang Yuan and others had already prepared for it. They had made a quiet room on the third floor for the grandmother and granddaughter of the Gong family to live. It was not far from Su Li from the attic on the top floor. It was very convenient. The Linli building was a winery, not an inn. The guest rooms were also on the back of the first floor. Seeing the room specially made by the people of the Linli building, Gong Min felt warm in her heart. She even had an impulse to cry. Her gratitude to Su Li couldn't be described in words. Even from the relatives of the Gong family, she hadn't experienced the feeling of being cared for a long time. Poor child, but she is also lucky. She can meet such a good doctor as Ms. Li. When Ruomin sighed and left with the servants, she had to go back to the school to preside over the affairs. After a while, the Linli building returned to silence. After Gong Min wiped the body of her grandma, it was very late at night. But she didn't feel sleepy at all. She was full of irritation and had nowhere to vent. After sitting quietly beside her grandma for a moment, she gently pushed the door open. Seeing the whole Linli building was dark, her heart seemed to be infected by the boundless darkness and was full of despair. "Brother, if you were still here, would you tell me what to do?" Gong Min whispered to herself and walked slowly along the darkness. Suddenly, she glimpsed a light. The light was not strong, but it seemed to make Gong Min find a glimmer of hope. She didn't know what she was thinking, but she didn't hesitate to get close to it. In the attic on the top floor, Su Li heard the movement and immediately put away the AO sword skills. Then she heard the source of the footsteps. Suddenly, she was relieved and reached out to grab the veil hanging on the wall. She immediately put it on. After finishing this step, Gong Min's small voice sounded outside, "Ms. Li, are you asleep?" Gong Min was perturbed. She didn't know why she was not afraid of Ms. Li. She clearly knew that Ms. Lee's martial arts were absolutely more powerful than those killers in the daytime. If she was offended at will, she would definitely suffer. As soon as she finished speaking, the attic suddenly opened silently and automatically. Gong Min was so shocked that she couldn't help but look up. In the dim candlelight, she saw a beautiful figure still covered with a veil and holding a thick and simple booklet in her hand. The color in the room was extremely dark, but Gong Min could see it clearly. The picturesque picture instantly reflected in her heart, as if the scene in front of her was beautiful and needed to be remembered. But the only pity was that Ms. Lee's veil was not removed. She still didn't know what Ms. Lee really looked like. "Miss Gong Min, why do you visit me so late at night?" Su Lee's voice was indifferent, but it made Gong Min feel cold. She said with grievance, "Miss Lee, sorry to disturb you. I can't sleep." Su Lee sighed softly. Indeed, it was taboo to disturb others' practice in the martial arts circle. Therefore, no matter Fang Yuan, Chu Qingning or others at night, they would never disturb her. But Gong Min was not from the martial arts circle. Forget it. She didn't need to be angry with a child. In this case, come and sit down. Hearing Su Lee's soft voice, Gong Min was relieved. She walked over and sat down opposite Su Lee. Looking at Su Lee's deep eyes, she couldn't help being intoxicated and reassured. Ms. Lee, who had such beautiful eyes, must be a fairy as beautiful as a fairy. Compared with Ms. Lee, she was much more ordinary. Gong Min was in a trance. She suddenly thought that if she only told Ms. Lee, she didn't have to worry about it. Why did she have to hold it in and support herself bitterly? Thinking of this, Gong Min's eyes gradually became firm. She suddenly said, "Ms. Lee, would you like to listen to my story?" Su Lee was a little interested in it. She looked up at Gong Min, who was serious, but then she lowered her head as if she didn't care. "If you want to tell me, just say it. I'm listening. But I may not help you with something. You have to think it over." Gong Min was happy and quickly said, "It's great that you are willing to listen. I just feel that it's a little hard for me to be alone. It's a great merit for me that you can cure my grandma." How dare Gong Min ask for too much? Su Lee replied lightly and didn't seem to care, but her ears were slightly raised. Gong Min's eyes darkened and gradually fell into memory. "In my childhood memory, the Gong family was extremely warm. There was a dignified but warm father. My mother and brother loved me dearly. But since my father married the second wife, everything changed." In the cold night wind, the girl's low narration was like a sad and beautiful ballad, demonstrating the tragedy of the world. A trace of white gradually rose from the east, indicating the arrival of a new day. In the attic on the top floor, Gong Min left with red eyes, but there was a relieved smile on her face. She finally didn't have to hold everything in her heart. Although Ms. Lee didn't seem to listen, she didn't have to support herself. When Gong Min completely disappeared outside the room, Su Lee put down the file and fell into meditation. In her opinion, Gong Min's experience was very simple. It was nothing more than a pot of muddy water stirred up by Wu Yun. Not only was her mother secretly poisoned, but even her brother was charged with a groundless crime and exiled. Gong Xiangjuan was so angry that she ran away from home with Gong Min. The whole Gong family became the home of Wu Yun and her biological son. Su Li had experienced this kind of plot too many times in the previous life. Every day in the martial arts circle, some families were destroyed and tragic. She had seen too many relatives killing each other, so she had long been accustomed to it. However, Gong Min's narration also made her gain something and solve the mystery that puzzled her in the previous life. In the previous life, she didn't know the specific reason why her disabled husband failed. Later, she sneaked into Yunjing to investigate carefully. But because the Wu family erased too many clues, she couldn't find out where to start. However, her thorough investigation didn't come up empty-handed. Among them, there was a suspicious point about the Gong family's demise. Different from other families that were destroyed by the general's mansion, the Gong family was destroyed by one person, and it was a master of martial arts circle who used a sword. Among them, a middle-aged woman died extremely miserably. Her face was distorted, and her limbs were broken. She had experienced extremely cruel torture before she died. That kind of torture was not commonly used even in the martial arts circle, so she was very impressed. She had always suspected that her disabled husband had a grudge against that madam, so he killed her personally. Now it seemed that it was very likely that the exiled first child came back to take revenge. The sudden death of his mother, grandmother, and Gong Min were enough to make the first child crazy. He tortured Wu Yun to death and slaughtered the whole Gong family, which became a puppet. Chapter 107. Wu Yun had a good sleep. When she got up in the morning and saw the bright sunshine outside, she was in a good mood. Girl of the Gong family, you forced me to do that. Don't blame me. Wu Yun snorted and began to have breakfast slowly under the arrangement of servants. If she hadn't been humiliated like that yesterday, she would not have done that. But it was good. As long as the old thing Gong Xiangjuan died, the entire Gong family would really fall into her hands and she would never be criticized. Gong Min was still young and couldn't be her opponent. She could make Gong Min obediently be manipulated by her with just a little trick. Thinking of this, Wu Yun was overjoyed and even couldn't help humming. At this moment, a maid rushed in the door in a panic and said, "Madam, it's bad. The old lady is fine and was taken away by the doctor. The person sent by Madam is also..." Crack. Wu Yun's expression suddenly changed. She didn't even know that the chopsticks in her hand fell to the ground. The person sent by the master is dead. After receiving the specific report from the spy, Wu Yun was so angry that her face turned red. How could the person sent by the master fail? And the person didn't come back and directly died in the school. Is it possible that there is a powerful senior in the school? Wu Yun suddenly thought of something and her expression changed slightly. Then she couldn't help but shake her head and said, "No. If it is true, how can Wen Ruomin let the doctor take the old thing away? In this case, the powerful person is the mysterious doctor. Mr. Li." Wu Yun's expression immediately became extremely ugly. She was not stupid and very smart. Otherwise, she would not have broken up the Gong family in just a few years and made it her puppet. The master once said that no one could detoxify the poison he gave. How come there is an unfathomable Mr. Li? Not only the person sent by the master is killed, but also the poison can be detoxified. Wu Yun's mind was in a mess. She had a smooth life in Yunjing. Why did she fail miserably in a small place like the Qinghe town? No. If the old thing really goes back to the Gong family, I will definitely have a lot of trouble. Since I can't take the opportunity to kill her halfway, I must think of another way. Wu Yun narrowed her eyes and gradually grasped the corner of the table with force. Her sharp and long nails left rows of marks on the table. She believed that everything could not be perfect and there must be flaws. But she just didn't find them or didn't make good use of them. Now, immediately go to the Tianya house to get a file on the current situation of the forces in the Qinghe town. No matter how much it costs, I must get the most detailed one. Wu Yun gently breathed a sigh of relief and ordered. She would study it carefully and make a long-term plan. While treating Gong Xiangjuan, Su Li returned to the school during the day and continued to study the books in the girls' school. It was useless to be an armchair strategist, but she had a lot of experience in her previous life and had been to many places. Combined with the biographies and the books, she had gained a lot. However, her reading speed was still too fast. Although she had only stayed here for a little more than 2 months, she had already read from the first floor to the top floor. There were only a few books left that she did not pay attention to. However, she had roughly memorized the words in those books. When she had nothing to do, she would pick them out and think about them. It could be said that she did not have a single moment to relax. On the 6th floor, Suli picked up the book and was about to write it down again, but an unexpected guest came. Ruhan. What are you? Suli looked May Ruhan up and down, and her eyes were full of surprise. May Ruhan wore a very simple cloth dress. If there were not a few hairpins on her head, she would almost regard her as a maid. May Ruhan smiled embarrassedly, but she didn't care about the eyes of others. She took Suli's hand to a secluded place and whispered, "Li, I have been worried about you since I heard that you were seriously injured. It's a pity that I'm too busy to visit you. Now that you're here, your body should have recovered." Suli nodded slightly. She had realized it now. "Are you here for the agreement with me?" May Ruhan was even more embarrassed. She said bitterly, "Li, I know it's not very kind. But I don't have a choice. Does the job you mentioned before still count?" "Of course." Suli nodded and smiled. There seemed to be a flash of light in her eyes. May Ruhan didn't see it, so she was surprised and said, "That's great. Li, when will we go?" Suli pretended to think, and then took the pen and ink. She wrote a line of words on the table and gave it to May Ruhan. "Take this letter to the Linley building. I believe they will take you in." May Ruhan was stunned. The Linley building. Did she hear it wrong? That was one of the most famous taverns in the entire Qinghe town. Just the fact that they had just released a new wine with the word "strong" on the signboard had caused countless people to discuss it. Even she, who didn't drink, had heard about it. Now Suli introduced her to work there. May Ruhan was very surprised. She heard that the salary of the Linley building was much higher than that of ordinary taverns and inns. Although she was curious why Suli had such a way, she had no time to think about it now. She took Suli's letter and went to the Linley building. Suli saw May Ruhan leave in a hurry. Her eyes flashed, and then she left immediately. She returned to the Linley building before May Ruhan arrived. Suli originally thought that May Ruhan's financial situation would be relieved after she went home, but she didn't expect that it was more serious than before. Now she wanted to know why May Ruhan was willing to do this. After all, May Ruhan was the person Suli liked for a long time. Now it was time to cultivate her. May Ruhan came to the Linley building with the letter. After hesitating for a few seconds, she finally plucked up the courage and stepped into the threshold regardless of others' gazes. "What can I do for you, sir?" A waiter came up and asked with a warm smile. May Ruhan suddenly panicked. She quickly took out Suli's letter and stammered, I'm here to work." The waiter was stunned and looked strange. The waiter of the Linley building was bought by the boss. Many people wanted to work in the Linley building, but they were all refused. The news had already spread. Didn't the woman know it? May Ruhan saw the waiter's reaction. Her heart thumped and her face turned pale. Was Suli's letter useless? When the waiter was in a daze, Yin Shuadong came from the back hall. The waiter hurriedly saluted and said, "Shopkeeper." Yin Shuadong took the paper from the waiter's hand and waved her hand. She said, "It's none of your business here. You can leave now." The waiter hurriedly responded, but he couldn't help sighing in his heart. The two people who were bought the worst now became the senior management of the Linley building. It was really fate that made fools of people. "Shopkeeper." When May Ruhan saw Yin Shuadong, who was small and lovely, she couldn't help but tense up. She was a big shot who was more powerful than the head of the May family. Although they seemed to be the same age, she was very nervous. Yin Shuarong opened Su Li's letter and couldn't help but curl her lips. This was an ordinary letter of introduction. She was really meticulous in doing things. Yin Shuarong looked Mei Ruhan up and down and sighed in her heart. But she pretended to be okay. She said lightly, "You come at the right time. I need a helper recently. Can you stay and help me?" "Ah." Mei Ruhan was surprised. She didn't do anything, but she was hired. Wasn't this child's play? Yin Shuarong was a little annoyed when she saw it. She said, "What are you confused about? If I haven't been in urgent need of people recently, do you think you can pass easily?" "No, no." Mei Ruhan waved her hand in panic. Then she bowed clumsily and said, "Thank you, shopkeeper. I will work hard in the future." Yin Shuarong suddenly had a more headache. Was this the key training target that Su Li said? Why did she feel that Mei Ruhan was just an ordinary and inexperienced little girl? Well, since Su Li said it, let's have a try. Yin Shuarong nodded slightly and took Mei Ruhan into the back hall to change clothes. Then she began to teach her what to do as a shopkeeper. Mei Ruhan was in the state of 100,000 Ys all the time, which almost drove Yin Shuarong crazy. Fortunately, Yin Shuarong soon found that Mei Ruhan was really smart. She learned some things quickly and learned quickly. Yin Shuarong gradually admitted that Su Li did find a promising person. If the Linley building opened branches in the future, there was no need to worry about the problem of the shopkeeper. Thinking of this, Yin Shuarong taught Mei Ruhan more attentively. Mei Ruhan was more and more frightened. She couldn't figure out how to learn how to be a shopkeeper when she was just a handyman. Was this what a temporary worker should learn? She didn't think about Su Li. After all, Su Li had a clean background. It was absolutely impossible for her to have a close relationship with such a force. But after thinking about Su Li, Mei Ruhan only felt strange. The Linley building was really strange. This thought lasted until the evening. Mei Ruhan received the first salary in her life. So much. Mei Ruhan looked at the 100 taels of silver in her hand and was confused. She did nothing today. How could she have 100 taels of silver? As long as you sign this contract, 100 taels of silver is your reward. Yin Shuarong smiled and pushed a piece of official paper. She didn't find that she had the talent to cheat people until today. Contract. Mei Ruhan's heart trembled. There was no free lunch in the world. Did this contract ask her to sell herself to the Linley building? It's not as serious as you think. It's just an ordinary contract. Yin Shuarong knew what Mei Ruhan was thinking. She couldn't help but laugh and said, "You might as well take it and have a look. It's up to you whether to sign it or not." Okay. Mei Ruhan swallowed. She picked up the thin paper and put it in front of her eyes. Then she was stunned. This was indeed an ordinary contract. Only a special provision was added. That was, during the period of working in the Linley building, you must not disclose any secret about the Linley building. And you must maintain absolute loyalty to the Linley building. Otherwise, you will be held responsible by the Linley building. Mei Ruhan looked at it again and again, but she didn't think it was a deterrent. Thinking of the current situation, she finally picked up the pen and wrote her name. Then she stamped it with her fingerprint. Yin Shuarong smiled more. She slowly put away the contract and said, "You can go now. Don't forget to come at night. If you don't come for one day, I will deduct it from your salary." Seeing that Yin Shuarong didn't put forward any excessive requirements, Mei Ruhan was finally relieved. She held the 100 taels of silver and went out of the leanly building happily. Then she identified the direction. Instead of going back to the school to rest, she ran out of the city. Chapter 108. Following Mei Ruhan all the way, Suli stood on the dark roof along the street and watched Mei Ruhan buy a lot of food and herbs from the shops on the street. Suli raised her eyebrows and became more interested. It seemed that Mei Ruhan had other encounters in the Qinghe town, and she couldn't tell anyone about them. Otherwise, with her personality, she wouldn't have asked for help without saying a word. Mei Ruhan packed everything with difficulty and put away the remaining silver. She seemed to think of something and couldn't help showing a trace of joy on her face. After going out of the city gate, she chose some remote and difficult roads regardless of the danger at night. After walking for an hour, Suli finally saw a dilapidated temple covered in the forest. There were many beggars in the dilapidated temple. Mei Ruhan walked into the dilapidated temple with ease and distributed most of the food to them. She came to the innermost room and put down the package on her back. She gasped hard and immediately whispered, "Brother Long, are you there? Ruhan is here to see you. Brother Long." After Mei Ruhan calmly called him 3 or 4 times, a man finally crawled out from behind the dilapidated Buddha statue, accompanied by the clanking of chains. The man was unkempt and dirty, and his clothes were ragged. But it could be seen that he was a young man in his early 20s, and he was not small. There was a chain on the shoulder bones of the young man. It seemed that someone had forcibly knocked one end of the chain into the bones, so that he could not exert his strength and suffered severe pain all day long. Suli saw him through the gap of the roof and raised her eyebrows slightly. The punishment of piercing the bones was a torture that only felons who committed serious crimes would receive. The chain on his shoulder was rusty and did not bleed, which was enough to infer that he had been chained for at least 1 year. He hasn't died after 1 year, and his pneuma is quite vigorous. Another person who practices Xiangong. Suli was very interested and continued to watch. When the young man saw Mei Ruhan coming, his eyes softened for a moment, but he became cold again before Mei Ruhan noticed it. "What are you doing here? Do you forget what I said last time? I told you to get out. Did you hear me?" The young man almost shouted with all his strength, and the chains on his body clanked. Mei Ruhan's body trembled, and tears of grievance welled up in her eyes. She, who had been spoiled since she was a child, had never been scolded like this. However, she did not leave. Instead, she wiped away her tears and began to take out something from the bag on her back. "This is an analgesic herb. The doctor said that it will have a miraculous effect if you crush it. These are dry rations. You must hide them well. Don't let other beggars snatch it away. I also brought you some clothes, water, and a dry cloth. Don't forget to wipe yourself." The young man stared at Mei Ruhan in a daze, and his face was trembling. Finally, he lay on the ground and said lightly, "It's up to you. Next time, I allow you to bring someone here. Don't walk alone at night." Mei Ruhan paused for a moment and then sped up. She lowered her head. No one could see that her eyes were shining, which had never been seen in the past 17 years. After Mei Ruhan hid the delicious food for the young man, she chatted with him for a while. 90% of the time, Mei Ruhan talked about the interesting things in the Qinghe town alone. The young man just said, from time to time. Mei Ruhan could talk about such a strange conversation for a full hour. Mei Ruhan didn't return to the Qinghe town alone until late at night. She didn't know who gave her the courage to walk at night. The area outside the Qinghe town was not a peaceful area. Fortunately, she had good luck in the past 2 months and didn't encounter any danger. After Mei Ruhan left, there was only the young man in the room. The coldness in the young man's eyes faded away, leaving only tenderness. He stared at the place where Mei Ruhan sat just now and couldn't help touching it. The hay was still a little warm. He had lost all hope. He even couldn't escape the pursuit of the officers and soldiers and died in the forest that day. But he didn't expect to meet her. What's more, she didn't expect that the first reaction when she saw him was not fear, but protection. She clearly had such a weak and delicate body, yet she carried him, a man who weighed more than 100 pounds, from the wilderness outside the city to this broken temple. In order for him to live here, she even gave all the valuable things she had to those beggars. The young man touched the rusty chain weakly. Bitterness surged in his mouth. He couldn't help but murmur to himself, "I am a dying man." Why did you make a wrong choice? If you think so, she really made a wrong choice. Su Li floated down from the roof. The young man's whole body suddenly tightened. He arched his back like a cheetah about to attack. The tenderness in his eyes was gone. Instead, he exuded the tragic atmosphere of a lonely wolf in a desperate situation. He was careless. The young man looked at the girl in black with a black veil suddenly appeared in front of him. He didn't even know when the girl arrived. Su Li looked at the young man with interest and nodded slightly. "You are very good. Although you know that you are not my opponent, you can ignite your fighting spirit. But Mei Ruhan can't. What are you going to do?" The young man in chain looked cold. "Don't touch her. Otherwise, I won't let you leave safely even if I have to risk my life." Su Li picked her slender fingers and teased him slowly. "Hey. Do you care about her at this time? Why were you so arrogant before? Do you really think that you can hurt others unscrupulously because you are dying?" The young man in chain was relieved. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Who are you to her?" Su Li smiled and sat down on Mei Ruhan's seat. She was not afraid of dirtying her expensive black gauze dress. She chuckled and said, "You are very smart, at least smarter than I thought. Will the IQ of a man who is in love drop automatically?" The young man in chain's face darkened. When did he fall in love? Besides, did he show it so obviously? "Who are you?" The young man in chain habitually touched his shoulder blade. The movement just now began to hurt again. "I am not a big shot." Su Li took the medicine bag that Mei Ruhan tidied up and threw it to him. "I am just Mei Ruhan's boss." "Boss?" The young man in chain was slightly surprised. "Isn't she a student of the Qinghe Girls' School? How can she have a boss? That's really unfortunate." Su Li took out the contract and waved it in front of the young man in chain. "She just signed it today. Otherwise, where do you think she got the money to buy medicine?" Although Su Li put away the contract very quickly, the young man still saw Mei Ruhan's handwriting at the bottom of the contract. His face suddenly became gloomy. It was an official contract. Mei Ruhan was just a weak girl. How could she resist? Mei Ruhan sold herself just for 100 taels of silver to treat his wound. The young man in chain looked at Su Li's black gauze dress and his lips couldn't help trembling. What kind of shop do you run? What kind of shop do you think it is?" Su Li cooperated with him and let out a charming laugh, which made the young man in chain's face turn pale instantly. "Medicine, take it back." The young man in chain threw the medicine bag fiercely and stared at Su Li. Suddenly, he rushed over at the fastest speed. "She can't go to the brothel. Give me the contract." Su Li stood up and took a few steps back. She dodged lightly, and the young man in chain suddenly missed her. The chain hit the ground with a clatter, which made the young man grimace in pain. He trembled and took a deep breath. Then he slowly got up and knelt on the ground. When he was about to lower his head, his eyebrows were touched by a cold fingertip, which stopped him from falling. He raised his head and saw a pair of eyes as deep as the sea. "Don't say something like, 'Beg me.' I don't like to hear this kind of words because it is useless. You should always remember it when you work for me. The young man in chain was stunned. Work for you? Sully poked the hard chain, which made the young man frown in pain. Do you want to take this thing with you all your life until you die? Anne. Sully stood up and crossed her arms in front of her chest. She said angrily, when did I say that I would run a brothel? The young man in chain was completely stunned. It took him a long time to react. His eyes were burning with anger. The long conversation just now turned out to be a joke. It's not a joke. Sully seemed to see through the young man in chain and said lightly, Mei Ruhan has become mine. Since she is interested in you, I naturally have to test you. As for the result, I barely pass. The young man in chain snorted and retorted, she is no one's accessory. Sully heard it and immediately laughed. It's not up to you to decide whether she is an accessory or not. Because you will soon become my accessory. Impossible. The young man in chain grinned and sneered, I have lost a lot. Now I am about to lose my life, but you want to deprive me of my last freedom. If I were capable enough, I would not let her work for a cruel person like you. I am cruel. Sully tilted her head and blinked her eyes. Then she chuckled and said, yes, I am cruel, no matter in the previous life or this life. But I have a way to make you follow me willingly. Do you believe it? Oh. The young man in chain struggled to stand up, as if he was defending the last bit of dignity. Then let me see what other means you have. You seem to forget what I said, or didn't you hear it at all? Sully walked to the young man and poked the chain with her fingertips. She said indifferently, I will say it for the last time. Do you want to die with this thing? Or, you don't want to stay with Mei Ruhan for the rest of your life? The young man's expression changed dramatically. Finally, he couldn't maintain his fragile dignity. If he could be with her above board, and not make her sad, his dignity seemed to be nothing. If you don't want to, just pretend that I didn't show up tonight. At this time, Sully clapped her hands and turned around to leave. Immediately, an urgent voice came from behind, wait. Sully turned around lightly. The young man in chain was in a dilemma. Finally, he said, do you really have a way to help me? You don't believe me. Sully's eyes suddenly lit up with black flames, then I will prove it to you now. Puff. Crack. Sully's eyes were slightly cold. She stretched out her hand and grabbed and pressed. The chain hanging in front of the young man's chest was immediately pulled out by a great force. It was straightened and then pulled out from his bones. The young man felt a sharp pain in his shoulders, and then his vision went black. He fainted from the pain and fell unconscious. Sully quickly bent down to stop the bleeding for the young man. But the corner of her mouth was slightly raised, showing a perfect curve. You can't stand such a little pain. It seems that your will is much weaker than I thought. It was an endless dark space. The young man in chain heard the words, Brother Long, from time to time. He didn't know where he was and could only keep running. Finally, he saw a glimmer of light and opened his eyes. Looking at the smooth ceiling, the young man in chain was at a loss. Then he began to think, where am I? Yes. I am in the ruined temple. That woman pulled out my chain directly. Am I dead? The young man in chain slowly turned his eyes and saw Mei Ruhan, who was crying and laughing at the same time. His scattered eyes finally focused. I am not dead. And, he reached out his hand and touched his shoulder. The chain was really gone. It was not a dream. Ruhan, the hoarse voice scared the young man in chain. How long did he sleep? You finally wake up. The girl in white suddenly appeared in front of the window. Although she had changed clothes, the young man in chains still recognized her at a glance. She was the devil-like woman who tortured him inside and outside. Chapter 109. My name is Long. The young man in chain was about to say the pseudonym he had used for many years. But when he saw the expectation in Mei Ruhan's eyes, he couldn't help but sigh and said in a low voice, Luoyi-chen, my name is Luoyi-chen. Isn't your surname Long? Mei Ruhan was stunned and didn't respond. Su Li teased softly, little fool, that is certainly his pseudonym. Have you ever seen a fugitive dare to use his real name? He is not stupid. Mei Ruhan scratched her head embarrassedly. She didn't feel disgusted by Su Li's words, although it was the first day that she met Mr. Li. When Luoyi-chen heard the word fugitive, his eyes became cold unconsciously. He looked at Su Li with full vigilance. Although Su Li removed the chain, he still doubted whether Su Li was an enemy or a friend. Su Li glanced at Luoyi-chen and was not angry. She said lightly, since you haven't figured out the situation, I will let you have a good rest today. If you still want to resist me after you recover, don't blame me for being merciless. Mei Ruhan, watch him. I don't have so much time to watch him. Then Su Li stepped out of the guest room. She really had something to do. Gong Xiangjuan needed to be carefully observed. She couldn't make any mistakes. After she left, the atmosphere in the room suddenly relaxed. Seeing that there was no one around, Luoyi-chen finally couldn't help but ask in a low voice, Ruo. Ruhan, do you know where we are? He still remembered the last time when he fainted because of the pain. The means that the horrible girl used was telekinesis, which could only be used by inborn seniors. Was it a stronghold of a sect in the martial arts circle? Did Mei Ruhan become the girl's maid for him? Mei Ruhan heard that Luoyi-chen called her so intimately. It seemed that after he was rescued by Mr. Li, his cold temperament also changed a lot. Looking at Luoyi-chen's vigilant face, she couldn't help but laugh. Brother Luo, don't be nervous. This is just a tavern in the Qinghe town. The person who rescued you is Mr. Li, the owner of the tavern, who is the miss just now. I am very good here. The shopkeeper taught me a lot of things that I can't learn in the school. Luoyi-chen was completely stunned when he heard Mei Ruhan's words. The fact was far from what he imagined. A tavern owner turned out to be an inborn master. Who would believe it? At this time, Mei Ruhan said again, Brother Luo, although Ms. Li is always unforgiving, she is actually very nice. I heard that she is not only good at martial arts but also kind-hearted. She saved the lives of Satrap Yen and the dean of the school. Now Dean Gong is still recuperating here. Ms. Li just left in a hurry. She must have gone to take care of the dean. Hearing Mei Ruhan's words, Luoyi-chen's mouth twitched slightly. Kind. Would a kind-hearted person directly pull out the chains from his shoulders and leave 2 bloody holes, almost causing him to die of pain? Luo, Mei Li, to say Luo. To say. To say, Li, to say, Li Long the young master Li Ching Li Foot. In the following days, there was no change in the Li building. There were more and more regular drinkers. The business was booming and the profits were growing. Jin Jintian was resentful. Of course, he wouldn't allow the county governor's mansion to develop so comfortably. He used all the business resources he could use to attack the industry in the hands of Madame Yen and even involved the embroidery workshop. The two sides fought back and forth, and it was very lively. After a while, when Ruomin finally took action, she directly removed Jean Rulan from the register of the Qinghe Girls' School and posted it on the bulletin board of the entire Qinghe town. Jean Rulan and the Jean family became famous. Even the ordinary people in the Qinghe town began to spread the scandal of the Jin family. When Ruomin took action so suddenly that Jin Jintian didn't expect it, his reputation was greatly damaged. Half of his property was seized by Madame of the Yen family at the right time. His vitality was greatly damaged. He was so angry that he vomited blood and almost went to see Jin Qing Ao directly. At this point, the Yen family won the battle and turned defeat into victory at one stroke. The Jin family was completely blocked by the Yen family in both the official road and the commercial road. The Jin family didn't take any action. The students in Su Li's class were all the children of officials, eunuchs, and merchants. They didn't come to class because of this. She was happy to be quiet. She detoxified Gong Xiangjuan every night and read the last few unique books during the day. Finally, on the 10th night, as soon as Su Li came back to the Linli building, Gong Min, who had been waiting at the door, greeted her with joy. "Miss Li. Grandma wakes up." Su Li raised her eyebrows and immediately went to the 3rd floor. Gong Min immediately followed her. Luo Yichen, who could walk, came out of the room with a cane. When he saw this scene, he couldn't help but smile. He could see that Miss Li was really good to her people, but her attitude towards him was extremely bad. Was it because he didn't admit that he was her subordinate, so she treated him as an outsider? "Brother Luo, why do you come out? You haven't recovered yet. Go back and have a rest." Mei Ruhan came over with the medicine. When she saw Luo Yichen, she immediately handed the medicine to Chu Qingning, who followed her. Then she hurriedly ran to help Luo Yichen into the room. Luo Yichen's eyes softened. When he looked up and saw Chu Qingning walking into the room, he subconsciously became alert. Chu Qingning looked at Luo Yichen up and down with interest. He said with amazement, "Li is really lucky. You recover so fast. You must be a practitioner. Where did she pick you up?" Luo Yichen was surprised. "Li, Miss Li." Luo Yichen understood the meaning of Chu Qingning's words and couldn't help but ask, "Were you also picked up by her?" Chu Qingning nodded slightly and sneered, "At most, I surrendered voluntarily. Unlike you, you are half dead. Even the prisoner seal has not been removed." Chu Qingning pointed. Luo Yichen looked down and saw that the loose clothes exposed his chest. The scorched prisoner seal was also exposed. Luo Yichen immediately pulled his clothes to cover it. His eyes were cold and vigilant. If Mei Ruhan were not around, he would probably escape from the window without saying anything. Chu Qingning tooted and waved his hand, "Relax. There are many deserters and fugitives here. You are not the only one. No one will report you. Your reaction reminds me of the past. After staying in the Linli building, I finally don't have to hide. Hey, it's good to have someone to protect me." Luo Yichen was stunned, but Chu Qingning also pulled down his clothes, revealing the indistinct character, "prisoner," on his right chest. After adjusting his clothes, Chu Qingning smiled and showed his white teeth. "I haven't asked you where you come from." "I am Chu Qingning from Nanjiang country." Seeing that Chu Qingning was so frank, Luo Yichen unconsciously relaxed and smiled. "I am Luo Yichen, Zhu Shougua." When they met for the first time, he had a good impression of Chu Qingning, because this person reminded him of his good friend when they fled together. He didn't care about how Chu Qingning was now. "Oh, don't talk anymore. The medicine is getting cold." Mei Ruhan didn't bother to listen to them. She didn't care about the deserters and fugitives. As long as she thought that the people here were good, it was okay. "Besides, I want to correct one thing. Brother Luo was picked up by me, not by Mr. Li. He is different from you, Brother Chu." Mei Ruhan said angrily, as if she was declaring her sovereignty. Chu Qingning was stunned at first and then laughed. Although Miss Mei is not from Jianghu, her temperament is like Jianghu. Luo Laosi, you have a good taste. I have a good taste. Mei Ruhan was annoyed. Chu Qingning's words were so annoying. Luo Yichen couldn't help laughing. For the first time, he felt that it was good to stay in the Linli building if he didn't see Mr. Li. But he soon felt strange. Luo Laosi. Why do you call me that? Chu Qingning gnashed his teeth and said with hatred, because someone said to rank the available talents in the winery. Fang Yuan is the first, Fang Mu is the third. You are the fourth, so you are the fourth. So, you are the second. Luo Yichen said subconsciously, and then he realized it. His face was slightly red and he couldn't help laughing. Chu Qingning's face was darker. You are really rebellious. Even the newcomer dares to laugh at me. Su. Mr. Li, I won't let you off. After Chu Qingning's trouble, Luo Yichen finally relaxed a lot. In the conversation with Chu Qingning, he roughly understood the current situation of the Linli building. It turned out that it was not an ordinary winery, but a rising force that was absorbing talents and gradually growing up. He found that except for Mei Ruhan, everyone here had the trace of practicing Xiangong. Even the busy waiter downstairs had the pneuma of cultivation. Although the pneuma was as small as a firefly for him, it was already something in front of ordinary people. If I recover fully, my cultivation will go to a higher level after years of accumulation. But I don't know where I can rank among the three of them. As for Mr. Li, Luo Yichen drank the medicine brought by Mei Ruhan. He felt bitter in his mouth, but he couldn't help showing a trace of fear in his eyes. Young master is really terrible. In the quiet room on the third floor, Su Li and Gong Min walked in and found that Gong Xiangjuan was staggering and trying to get out of bed. Gong Min was shocked and walked over to hold her grandma. Grandma, you just woke up and you are weak. Don't move. Gong Xiangjuan looked at Gong Min, who had lost a lot of weight. She couldn't help but say, Min, you have suffered with me. Grandma, Gong Min murmured. Tears welled up in her eyes and fell down. Gong Xiangjuan sighed and turned to Su Li standing aside. She was about to get out of bed and salute, Mr. Li, although I am in a coma, I know what happened these days. Mr. Li, thank you so much. Su Li quickly stopped Gong Xiangjuan and smiled warmly. Old Dean, you don't have to do this. I just help you as much as I can. You still need half a month to recuperate. You'd better not get out of bed. Well, I will listen to Mr. Li. Gong Xiangjuan lay on the bed and sighed slowly. I have long noticed Wu Yun's behavior. I didn't expect that I would be poisoned. Unfortunately, Min's mother was not as lucky as me. She met Mr. Li. Gong Min held Gong Xiangjuan's hand and shook her head. It's not your fault. Grandma, I am so happy that you can wake up. If even you. Gong Xiangjuan sighed and touched Gong Min's head. She looked up and said, Mr. Li, I think Min has told you about the Gong family. If I really have an accident, I hope Mr. Li can be kind enough to take me in. I can't go back to the Gong family. Gong Min immediately panicked when she heard Gong Xiangjuan's words. Old Dean, you don't have to do this. Su Li waved her hand and gave Gong Min a reassuring look. Your body is fine. As long as you recuperate, you can live for more than 10 years. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.